Chapter 675. He didn't eat a pig's head, nor did he eat an elephant's leg. It was one thing to be tricked into such a damn place, but he was also forced to watch someone else transform. Huaisher felt that he had been hurt. If it was an ordinary person, Huaisher would have beaten his dog brain out long ago. However, after carefully looking at the solemn and cold Shuang's father in front of him, Huaisher decided to talk to him calmly. I said, "Can't you really let me go?" "Sorry, I can't." Vladimir shook his head, and the old voice overlapped with his. "If you surrender without a fight, we can talk about cooking as long as you don't try to leave." "Looks like there's no room for discussion." Huaisher sighed. "There's nothing I can do. After all, I took the money." Vladimir sighed and raised his hand. In his hand, a dazzling golden light appeared and turned into a handle. Then, a slender and sharp saber extended from the handle. "Wait." Huaisher suddenly raised his hand and gritted his teeth. "How much did your employer give you?" "I'll give you double." Vladimir was stunned for a moment, and then he was ecstatic. "Really? Yeah, that's great. If possible, I don't want to kill Miss YG. He beamed and counted with his fingers. $130 million US. Double is $260 million US. In that case, I can refund an additional $30 million US to the boss as liquidated damages. Huaisher's smile gradually stiffened. Soon, he lowered his eyes helplessly. $260 million US? Even if Huaisher squeezed together, it would be difficult for her to come up with 20 million. Moreover, the money from Hu Po's stinky sister hadn't arrived yet. Where did he get so much money to hire this guy to work? With this money, wouldn't it be nice to buy a fighter jet? Forget it. He interrupted Vladimir's words and then raised the blade of resentment. "You'd better kill me, or I'll kill you." In an instant, a fierce flame that wasn't inferior to the color of frost rose from Huaiji Suzi's body. The instant the hand of confinement was activated, flames burst out from the forging furnace, continuously pulling the drifting bloody light in the air like an engine that was rumbling loudly. Young Master Ming's divinity emerged from the darkness of the bone-burying sanctuary. In that instant, against the backdrop of darkness and ferocious flames, Miss YG's lips curled into a mocking smile. It was shameful to say, but in this place he was the host. In the huge glazed palace, countless bloody colors surged between the walls. Within this demonic realm, everything was constantly emitting an irresistible amount of negative origin substance, corroding everything in its path. The moment Hooper reacted, he instinctively grabbed something beside him. He grabbed nothing but air. Shin, who had been so close to him, had disappeared. He had no idea where she had been thrown to. He had been tricked. Jiujing, that bastard, is actually desperate. However, at this moment, when Shinichi Masahira and Shinichi Masahira were having a showdown between the chef and demon, when everyone was unprepared and unprepared. If you were to think about it in a bad way, perhaps his elder brother, who had been studying abroad for many years, was already standing on Jiujing's side. In the silence, a clear and crisp voice suddenly rang out. The sound of a phone ringing, right in the middle of the palace. A dark green old-fashioned phone booth suddenly appeared. In the narrow space inside, a hanging phone was constantly ringing. It was hard to tell whether it was a sharp or clear ringing. It kept ringing. It was filled with patience. Until Hoopa pushed open the door, reached out, took the phone, and put it to his ear. "Who is it?" Hoopa asked coldly. "Let me guess, is it my elder brother, Mr. Masahira?" "Long time no see." "Hoopa." The low and hoarse male voice on the other end of the phone replied. "It's me." "Then can you tell me, what did you do?" Hoopa asked coldly. "Be merciful and tell me. What role did my elder brother play in the destruction of the Shinichi family?" "Me? I didn't do anything." On the other end of the phone, the middle-aged man who was wiping his hands in front of the sink raised his head and looked at himself in the mirror. He told her seriously, "I just chose not to play any role. So, you want to tell me that you're innocent?" Hoopa sneered. "You've been like this since you were young, Brother Masahira. You've always played by yourself, never taking the initiative to speak, always pushing the boat with the current, never showing your face. What Do you plan to not show your face when you become the head of the family in the future? I don't plan to do that. Shinichi Masahira shook his head. As a member of the Shinichi family, I got involved, but this doesn't mean that I have any interest in the position of head. He said, the reason I came back is to put an end to this. No matter how dazzling the Shinichi family's existence is, to me, nothing more than a restraint. From this point of view, I'm on Jiujing's side. I sincerely hope that this cage that exists only in name can be completely destroyed. In the silence, Shinichi Masahira sighed softly. Hoopa, I originally thought that you would be the same as me, that your talent is even above mine. Unfortunately, the shadow that uncle left on you is far greater than I imagined. If the Shinichi family didn't exist, you might be able to achieve even greater things. At least, you'd be far more free than you are now. There's nothing in this world that's closer to a lie than freedom. Brother, you should save it. Hoopa sneered in response. If that's what you plan to do, what happens next will have nothing to do with the Shinichi family. Although it's a bit heartless, I hope so. After leaving the family, my life has been smooth and stable. Hoopa, not every fish wants to live in the ocean of other people's imaginations. Shinichi Masahira regretfully said goodbye. From today onwards, the Shinichi family has nothing to do with me. I'm Sergei Satomi. That's all. If there's any other purpose besides this, it's that I hope you can also obtain your freedom. Before hanging up, he said sincerely, even if you don't care about this, this is the last bit of blessings from your former elder brother. He said goodbye, Hoopa. No, it's goodbye forever. Hoopa coldly corrected him. You can run away like this, coward. Congratulations, you're free. The communication was cut off. The middle-aged man in front of the mirror turned off the faucet and straightened his tie. He turned around and walked out of the bathroom, heading towards the conference room. The secretary looked up and was slightly surprised when he saw how calm he was. What's wrong? He asked, puzzled. I can't put my finger on it, but it feels different. The secretary asked curiously, Did something good happen, Mr. Sergei? Yes, it feels like I've been reborn. The man named Sergei chuckled softly and looked up at the official from the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. Speaking of which, I have a new proposal for the import of crude oil from Yingzhou in the second half of the year. The conference continued, but it had nothing to do with Shinichi Masahira. This was a story that belonged to Sergei. After hanging up, the glazed palace returned to a deathly silence. Apart from the cries of pain and moans of bliss in the distance, there was no other sound. The phone booth slowly turned into a phantom and disappeared. When the interference from Shinichi Masahira disappeared, the all-pervasive bloody light filled the air and headed towards Hoopa. The surging eight evils slowly penetrated his bones. Then, it crashed into an invisible barrier and disappeared without a trace. Only the ancient mirror in his arms gave off a faint sense of warmth. Hoopa didn't need to take it out to know that it was a bronze mirror that was made from an ancient fragment and was glowing faintly. It was constantly extracting the evil thoughts that invaded her soul and maintaining her consciousness. This was the parting gift that Mystic Bird had given her. There was an ancient mirror in a Pang Palace, the gall bladder, which could reflect diseases of the five viscera. If a woman had evil thoughts, she could be seen in the mirror, and the Qin Emperor would kill her. The mirror was a mirror that constantly reflected her consciousness, allowing her to maintain the most basic level of calmness and tranquility. Otherwise, she would have long since fallen into madness. However, to give her such a gift before parting, that old man Mystic Bird was unexpectedly wicked. On the afternoon of the day, she walked into Mystic Bird's office. The old man, who was in a hurry to go home and watch television with his great-grandson, gave her two options. There's a saying that if a foreigner enters Dongxia, then Dongxia will. To be honest, the Social Security Bureau doesn't care about your past identity. You can stay. This isn't a job that was specially assigned to you. However, no matter where you are, if you want to have a place that you can call home, you should first feel peace. Therefore, Hoopa, wherever you can find your peace, you should go. The old man, who was eating melon seeds under the setting sun, calmly told her, I won't force your decision. The next day, after receiving Hoopo's reply, He wasn't surprised at all. Instead, he gave this thing to her. The sacred mark of Prajna is the crystallization of the evil path. It nibbles away at resentment. If you can't control your resentment, then it will devour you. You have hatred in your heart, even if you don't actively hate anything. Hoopa! If you can't let go of this obsession, you will never be free from the haze of the past. So, Shinichi Amber, are you really ready? Hate? She lowered her head and stared at the ferocious face of herself in the bronze mirror. Countless wisps of black smoke rose up and interweaved on her face to form a ferocious illusion of Prajna. She couldn't see the young girl's beautiful face anymore. Perhaps that was the real her. She had long been devoured by Prajna's hatred. After so many years, she hadn't made any progress. Perhaps she had long fallen into the demonic path. She was lost in the huge vortex of hatred, but she couldn't freely vent it. She couldn't truly become a demon. She couldn't obtain the freedom to hate, and she didn't have the qualifications to not hate. How laughable, Hoopa! She laughed self-deprecatingly. She listened to the deep footsteps in the distance. It had been so long, but it was so familiar, until the door opened with a bang. A majestic glazed armor appeared from his demonic realm. Behind the ferocious mask, there was only a wisp of bloody fire, burning fiercely. The remnant soul of the past that was immersed in the evil thoughts roared in pain. Chi-Chi! This was the reunion of the father and daughter after 8 years. But before she drew her sword, what should she say? In silence, the young girl's eyes drooped. Chi-Chi-Chi-Chi, AI Fu-Chi. I'm back, father. I haven't seen you for so long. How have you been? What responded to her was a roar, and roar filled with chaos. There were no more words left, and there was no intention to talk. There was no warm greeting of welcome back, only bone-piercing, killing intent. The ferocious armor drew its sword. The Vajra sword that was burning with blood was raised and aimed at her face. Slash! Chi-Chi-Chi-Chi-Chi. Chapter 676. In a trance, he smelled the smell of the floor and the smell of sweat. His mouth was full of the smell of rust, and the stinging blood filled his lungs, making it difficult for him to breathe. Are you going to fall just like that? The old voice angrily rebuked, and the angry wooden sword slashed down, mercilessly smashing into his face. Too disgraceful, Sasaki. Stand up. He tried hard to raise his hand and support his body, but soon he fell to the ground again. His vision turned dark. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. He held his head and begged for mercy in a low voice. Please let me rest for a while. Just a while, just a while. Then quit, get out of here. A merciless kick landed on his body. The floor seemed to roll up and hit him. The world was spinning and turbulent. The expressionless old face gradually blurred. The old man lowered his head and looked down at him without any mercy. Listen to me, Sasaki. Ever since the dojo was founded, among the students I've seen, your talent, aptitude, and ability are the worst. This is not an incentive, but a fact. The old man looked down at his face coldly and said word by word, You are rotten wood. You have to learn to give up, understand? In the silence, there was only the sound of panting and struggling. The young man with a bruised nose and swollen face struggled to support his body. He raised his hand and grabbed the old man's trouser leg. Teacher, please teach me. He crawled on the ground and sat down under the deformed soil. He kowtowed humbly and begged, Please teach me. I have a favor that I have to repay and something that I have to do. Even though he was delirious, he still struggled in vain. Please be merciful. Please. In a long silence, the old man looked down at the humble young man indifferently. After a long time, he slowly raised his foot and shook off the hand that was pulling his trouser leg, cruelly kicking him away. Since you can't give up swordsmanship, learn to give up your life, idiot. The wooden sword slashed down and pierced the floor in front of him. The old man ordered for the last time, Stand up now. The old voice was mixed with an angry roar, exploding in his ears. How long are you going to sleep, bastard? His vision went black. Sasaki woke up from his dream and felt a sharp pain in his face, as if someone had punched him hard. Finally, he woke up from the painful dream created by the large amount of tranquilizers and opened his eyes. Then he saw the Zwido market in front of him. He stood rooted to the ground. The blind swordsman covered in blood had already broken into the cage. He stood in front of his bed and raised his hand to help him break the shackles and the infusion tubes. What was even more shocking was Zatoichi's current appearance. "What's wrong with you?" Under the tattered Ingzhou robe was a camouflage uniform, a bulletproof vest, a gray helmet, pitch-black military boots, a full magazine, a pistol tied to his leg, a grenade hanging from his waist, and 2 MP5s raised high in his hands. And the 3 katanas on his back. They were simply armed to the teeth. But it was completely different from what he expected Zwido to be like. "Where did you get this SWAT team equipment?" Sasaki was stunned. "Don't young people always say that recently?" "Times have changed, Sasaki." The blind swordsman grinned and showed a cheerful smile. "Sure enough, the gun is still useful. You didn't expect it, right? I'm now a special instructor of the Ground Self-Defense Force." "What the hell?" "Part-time. Blind people don't have a good life in this world. If you don't work hard, do you want to massage people? Let's go." Zatoichi put down a gun and stretched out his hand to pull him up from the bed. "I broke in during the chaos. I still don't know what's going on outside. It's not easy for a blind person to sneak in. Don't make it difficult for me to escort you out of here, okay?" Sasaki fell to the ground and heard a crack. The leg braces collided with the ground, and his face twitched instantly. "Severe pain. Your leg is broken?" Zatoichi's ears twitched slightly. He frowned and listened to the footsteps outside the door. His expression suddenly became impatient. He could only put Sasaki's arm on his shoulder and sighed helplessly. "One of us is blind and the other is lame. If you quit in the future, we can still work together as a performer. You show the way, and I give you a massage. Isn't that great? Why are you so stubborn?" "Thanks." Sasaki smiled bitterly, took a knife from his back, and used it as a crutch. He limped out with Zatoichi. The more they went out, the more tragic the scene they saw. In the gorgeous lapis lazuli palace garden, there were constantly distorted monsters running around, eating flesh and blood. The scene of living hell was constantly playing out. The boiling 8 evils filled every inch of the air, pulling everyone little by little towards the transformation of solidification and hell. When the transformation into disaster, the horrible demonic nature of his incarnation lingered in everyone's heart. Like a sharp blade, it hangs over the head of every person who sees home. As long as there was a trace of evil in the heart, it would be quickly magnified and distorted, ushering in distortion and transformation. This was a curse against the bloodline. "Sasaki, I know you." "Sasaki, help me, help me." The wriggling man struggled out of the original empty shell. On the ground, he raised his twisted palm and screamed sharply, "I'm not at peace. Have you forgotten? A few years ago, we drank together. Save me, I spoke up for you." What responded to him was a cold gunshot. Zatoichi listened to the sound, aimed at his face, and pulled the trigger. After shooting a magazine of bullets indifferently, he took off the thermite, sprinkled it on the rapidly decomposing body, and ignited it. The fire rose. Sasaki was still in a daze. He stared at everything in front of him in shock. "Give up, Sasaki. Riken is hopeless." Sasaki was silent and didn't speak, as if he had lost his soul. "There's no time to waste. Let's go." Zatoichi was furious. He grabbed his hand and wanted to drag him away, but in an instant he froze in place. His angry expression froze, and gradually, his face lost its color. It was pale. He felt the danger and the terrifying aura. In the sudden burst of loud noise, a cold current gushed out from the gap in the wall, instantly taking away all the heat. A thick icicle burst from outside the wall and stabbed diagonally into the sky. Then, with a flash of cold light, the icicle broke into pieces and fell to the ground, together with the figure on it. A high-pitched roar came from the frost wind. It was like a giant elephant neighing. Shuang's father advanced in the roar. The golden saber slashed down, pressing forward step by step, brazenly suppressing the slender figure in the blizzard without mercy. He couldn't show mercy. Because the blood was dancing, the evil thoughts in the sky were stirred up, surrounding the crimson blade and slashing forward. It was still in the shape of the extremely crude Tangju. Was that really swordsmanship? Could it really be called swordsmanship? Or did he just randomly pick up a stick and make do with it? But when the blade of hatred was raised, the ferocious fire of evil thoughts attached to it, burning vigorously. When the blade slashed down, it burst out with a shrill roar, setting off stormy waves in the blizzard. The blizzard rolled back. Shuang's father's saber suddenly shook, and another gap appeared. Soon, the multiplying frost had covered the gap. But then, the blade of hatred slashed down again. There was no time to breathe. The bombardment of 1812 had just begun. The flames of the hand of confinement burned vigorously. In the fierce flames, the beautiful face was as ferocious as an evil spirit at this moment. The casting furnace was extracting the evil thoughts in the air, transforming the power full of the aura of hell into source substance, bursting out together with a slash. It didn't care about the possibility of being eroded at all, and it didn't need the cheating and transformation of the culinary demon skills. Now, the divinity pointed at Xia emitted a faint light, enveloping his body. The moment he advanced to become the leader of a large group, the divinity in Xiao Ming's bud had already swallowed all the pollution that wasn't worth mentioning. In this demonic realm, he was the home ground. The darkness of the bone burial sanctuary surged, and the pious hymn moved forward again. The iron crow spread its iron wings and broke through the obstruction of the blizzard. Its sharp claws and teeth attacked the burly Shuang's father. It was like a burning meteor whistling back and forth. After attaching Huaishi's origin substance to the crows, the blazing crows were like relics of the border. Every time they swooped down, it was as if Huaishi had personally launched an attack. That slender and thin figure had inconceivably suppressed Shuang's father under his hands. The blizzard suddenly roared, and the spreading cold current quickly shrank. Just behind Shuang's father, it turned into a huge carriage. Under the pull of the frozen horse, it rumbled forward, finally dispersing the flock of crows that filled the air. Vladimir took a step back, raised his hand, and pulled out the frozen icicles behind him. The sharp icicles quickly extended in his hand, turning into a heavy halberd. With one hand holding the saber and the other dragging the exaggerated halberd, he set off a new storm again. What on earth is that? In the corner, the blinds Watu raised his turbid eyes, sluggishly feeling the changes in the air. It was as if an unreasonable storm had suddenly descended from the sky, enveloping everything. The turbulent source substance formed a vortex, and when the two huge eyes of the storm collided with each other, it set off a world-shaking turbulence. But in the mind's eye's observation, the illusory eye of the storm was not empty. Even though he couldn't see the outline of the body, he could still feel the terrifying essence. One of them was wrapped in a primordial frost, as if it wanted to freeze everything in its path. The origin's substance spread wildly, forming a storm that covered the sky and covered the earth. And the other seemed to be the distorted demonic realm itself. Just like his incarnation that had descended, the heavenly demon had descended into his courtyard and palace, speaking magic. The boiling evil thoughts surged, tamed, and were driven by her, swallowed. She had already turned into the master of this place. She had turned from guest to host. Compared to the endless sea of despair in the Twilight Village, the current incarnation was simply child's play. The demonic realm created by Yatsufusa had already become a toy in her hands. Zwatu stiffened in the corner. He subconsciously grasped the hilt of his sword. When he accidentally entered the scene of fierce beasts fighting for territory, he would feel fear. But now, when two tyrannical auras descended from the sky, tyrannically descending on their heads, Zwatu could only feel an indescribable tremor. When facing a level 10 storm, was fear useful? Would showing goodwill have any effect? Could kneeling and begging for mercy avoid being ravaged? It wasn't a threat that could be avoided by showing goodwill and retreating. No matter what a bystander did, it was useless. He only hoped that luck would favor him and not involve himself with the idiot next to him, until the violent roar gradually faded away with the storm, leaving only a mess in the courtyard. After confirming that the two had gone far away, Zwatu slowly let out a sigh of relief. He reached out to pull Sasaki to continue walking, but Sasaki still stood in place. There was a soft sound of footsteps in the distance. Outside the open gate of the palace, a young samurai slowly came, holding a blood-stained blade, and ruthlessly cut off the head of a blood relative. When he raised his head, he saw the messy courtyard and the two people standing in the middle. At first, he was stunned, and then he immediately understood. It's Sasaki-san and his friend. Have they already run out? That's great. It seems that they are free. As if he was happy for the escape of the two from the bottom of his heart, Raikenju solemnly said, "This is no longer a safe place. The two of you have nothing to do with it. Please leave quickly." In this way, the blood-stained face that resembled a fox smiled, nodded very politely, and turned to leave. Then, he heard the low sound of a sword behind him. It was Sasaki. "Sorry, Zwatu. I really can't leave you alone." The lame man held his weapon in his hand and staggered forward, staring at Jiojio's face, whispering softly, "There are always some grievances that need to be settled." Chapter 677. F***CK. Idiot, what do you want to do? Go. Zatoichi wanted to roar like this. If it weren't for the occasion, he almost wanted to shoot this idiot with a tranquilizer gun, and then beat him up. It would be best if he was paralyzed. Don't get into trouble again, please. Isn't it good to be alive? As a former companion, as a close friend who had hit it off at first sight, he should have done so. But now, he couldn't stop Sasaki's behavior. As a samurai, he couldn't help but feel proud of his friend's loyalty and determination. In silence, Zatoichi held the hilt of his sword. "If that's the case, let me know." Sasaki interrupted him and said softly, "Please don't interfere in the next thing. This is my duty, my mission." "I know." Zatoichi nodded reluctantly and handed over the sword. "Then use it, Sasaki. You deserve it. Only this, don't refuse." It was the sword of the blind swordsman, Zatoichi, and was known as the famous sword that existed with the heroic spirit of Ingzhou. The moment it fell into Sasaki's hand, the long sword called Pure Blade buzzed and trembled, bursting out a low cry, as if it was cheering. Now was the time to practice the chivalrous way and settle the grudges. Jiojing's expression was still calm, staring at the pair of eyes full of murderous intent, and nodded respectfully and politely. "Long time no see, Sasaki-san. It's really long time no see. Didn't we just meet, Jiojing?" Sasaki stepped forward with his broken leg, stood 10 steps away from him, and asked softly, "Why are you so hypocritical? Now, there's no need to call me sir, right? You used to be my first teacher of swordsmanship. It's not too much to call you sir." The young samurai narrowed his eyes and suddenly laughed. "You used to be a samurai loyal to the Rigian clan, right? Do you have any reason to fight me? Because your stench can't be hidden anymore? You murderer." Sasaki slowly pulled out his sword and calmly told him, "If I don't kill you here and let you destroy the Rigian clan, I will regret it for the rest of my life." What's wrong with that? Even a loyal man like Mr. Sasaki would exile his family in order to survive. Isn't it good to be destroyed like this? Jiojing shrugs her shoulders and looks around at the hideous scene of the Ritkin clan, the hideous face of the Ritkin clan hidden in the darkness. It's better to just destroy this kind of place that only hides filth. "Mr. Sasaki, haven't you thought about it? Ever since I was exiled, there hasn't been a day that I haven't thought about it." Sasaki calmly replied, "As a samurai, I'm ashamed to have such resentment against my former master, but I can't restrain such thoughts and feelings. But even so, I can't forget the kindness that the old master once bestowed upon me. If you want to destroy all of this, please step over my dead body. My life was given to me by the Riken clan, so let me repay you with this life." In the silence, Li Jiu saw Jiujing's smile gradually turn gloomy, leaving only coldness. You are no longer the samurai of the Riken family, Sasaki Kimasa. It doesn't matter. When you became a murderer, didn't you also give up the glory of the Riken clan? Sasaki nodded and replied in agreement. I think it's good, very good. Now, it's just a duel between two nameless Ronins. No matter who wins or loses, it's just a fight between two wild dogs. It doesn't hurt the reputation of the Riken clan. Just like that, she raised the blade and pointed it at his face. Until the end, Sasaki felt lucky and proud for this. He said, Please draw your sword, Riken clan. At that moment, Jiujing closed her eyes in disappointment. When she raised her eyes again, the calmness and smile that she used to hide in the past were gone, leaving only the darkness and coldness of death. The last disguise was removed, and the face of a vicious beast was revealed here. The bloodstained blade was raised. Across the melted frost and dried blood on the ground, the biting cold, murderous intent rose. There was no need to use any words to express or describe it. The moment he made up his mind, there was only one result. Between the murderer and Ronin Sasaki, only one of them would be able to leave this place alive. Other than that, there was no other possibility. The air froze between the cold light of the blade. It was as if the needle of time had stopped. The world was silent, and even the sound of breathing was quickly fading away. Those dazzling phantoms, thirsty moans, and tense wails, the strange fragrance that made people lose their souls, and the heart-wrenching stench had all disappeared. The pure killing intent shattered all these insignificant things. All that was left was each other in the eyes and the sword in the hands. It was obviously short, less than a moment, but in the senses, it seemed to be endless, turning into a terrible suffering like hell. Until the blazing light burst out. There was a violent thunder roaring from the sky, tearing the membrane of his body. It wildly stretched its body and spread into the blazing lightning that reached the sky and the earth. It fell from the sky. The roar that overlapped suddenly burst out, mixing with the loud sound of thunder. The samurai drew his sword. Across a long distance, the fierce confrontation ended in an instant. The evil spirit and the samurai had already crossed each other. Only blood spurted out from Sasaki's chest. The indestructible, pure sword fell from his hand and pierced into the soil. Then a scarlet torrent gushed out from the crack in his chest. He was a step behind. He was a moment slower. Victory and defeat were decided, and life and death were decided. I didn't expect that in the end. The one who came to replace Riken to ask for me was a wild samurai who was not even qualified to announce his family name. Riken Hisashi turned his head, glanced at the opponent on the ground, and sneered, How ridiculous, Sasaki. Didn't anyone tell you that your swordsmanship was never worth mentioning? He seemed to have said something else, but Sasaki could no longer hear clearly. The familiar trance and sleepiness came again, hugging him, wanting to pull him into the eternal dark side. It seemed that someone was shouting something, but it was too far away, too vague. He gradually closed his eyes. Stand up, Sasaki. In the darkness, a cold and old voice sounded in his ears. Stand up immediately. How much disgrace do you want to make before you stop? Sensei. At that moment, he finally remembered where he was. Who was he? I am Sasaki Kayomesa. He opened his eyes, staring at the rapidly darkening and collapsing demon world, staring at the enemy's back. Using the last of his strength, he propped up his body. The broken soul was glowing, and with blood, he climbed up from the ground again. Even if he couldn't get up, he still groped and looked for his weapon. The confrontation was not over yet. Come on, Jio Hisashi, he said. I'm right here. Jio Hisashi's footsteps came to an abrupt halt, and he slowly turned around. On that fox-like face, the original mocking smile gradually darkened and became angry and ferocious. You're really haunting me, Riken grinned, turned around, and his expression became ugly and crazy. This time I won't forget the last step, Sasaki. Stepping on the spreading pool of blood on the ground, Riken Hisashi stepped forward and raised his sword. He wasn't angry, nor did he lose control or neglect. Instead, he was ready, and even went all out to deal with this dying opponent, not leaving any negligence or chance to turn the tables, and simply gave him the final end. Cut off all the pain and worries. Even if Sasaki had no strength to get up, even his appearance could no longer be seen clearly. The moment of terminal lucidity had passed. Now, the pure blade of Zatoichi was stabbed in the pool of blood, and even the sword in his hand was gone. As if it had a premonition of his death, the pure blade trembled and made a faint whining sound. But Sasaki didn't feel pity. Just like what Jio Hisashi said, his swordsmanship was never worth mentioning, and he didn't deserve such a treasure sword. Even before that, he had been clear about it. You are Shiomu. This was the conclusion that the old man, known as the Sword Saint, had once given, the cruelest truth and the most painful result. Who knows how many times that grumpy old man angrily scolded, "Why can't you learn to give up? Is there only one way to repay kindness in this world? I want to follow that master. I want to be like that master." The former Sasaki knelt on the ground, bowed, and begged from the heart, "Teacher, please forgive me. Please teach me." But the old man's eyes only had pity and regret. "Sasaki Kaiomesa, you don't have talent and ability. Give up. No matter how hard you work, Kendo won't favor you." He said, "If you want to win, Kendo or life, you can only choose one of them. Even so, it doesn't matter." How should one describe the ecstasy and peace of that moment? It was as if the wish of a lifetime had been fulfilled and all the efforts had been rewarded. Look, this was not a dead end. How generous the world was. Even a dull person like him could receive hope. He shed tears of gratitude and kept kowtowing. "It's really great. I can finally live up to that master's kindness and expectations." After a long silence, there was only a sigh of pity. "Then, this is the last skill I can teach you as a teacher. How to give up your life." This was the last teaching that the old man left him. Everything that happened after that, everything that he learned after that, and everything that he inherited after that had already been engraved in his bone marrow and soul. Day after day, year after year, 20 years of hard practice and waiting, countless painful experiences of tears and incontinence, at this moment, finally ushered in the reward. At that moment, he raised his eyes and stared at the silence close at hand. He smiled. From the broken body, there was a bright light rising into the sky. That was the flame that had been restrained for 20 years, bursting out from the soul. There was a towering shadow rising from his broken body, showing the terrible majesty of the immovable Wisdom King. There was a murderous flame burning in his eyes, together with his soul. In the frozen time, the flowing light shrank into a line, and the will and determination in the furnace turned into steel, reversing the boundary between life and death, stirring up the axis of heaven and earth, and everything in the world was shattered. Endless sea of bitterness, freedom. This was the once-in-a-lifetime draw the sword. Slash. Chapter 678. After a moment of brilliance and brilliance, the dream and life burned out together. Only dust and ashes fell from the sky. The world gradually collapsed in front of his eyes and disappeared without a trace. Everything was going away quickly. He waved goodbye. There was no time to confirm the result of the sword, but that kind of thing didn't matter anymore. Perhaps he once had 100% of uneasiness and fear about everything in this world, but only this sword he would not doubt, because it was over, whether it was the other party or himself. In the rapidly darkening world, countless flickering shadows flashed in front of Sasaki's eyes. The tiny essence accumulated in his long life flew away in front of his eyes, bringing not uneasiness and fear, but indescribable fullness and gratitude. It was as if he had returned to the past again. Under the former laughter, language, wine glasses, moonlight, and flowers, everything became so real. The phantoms of the past emerged from the dust, quietly standing on both sides of the road, silently sending him off. Those familiar faces kept appearing, with warm eyes. Daozen Sama, Sensei, Miss Amber, Zatoichi, Professor, Headmaster, and Mr. Huaishur. At the end of the darkness, Sasaki looked back, bowed gratefully, and expressed his final gratitude to the people who had accompanied, encouraged, and helped him along the way. Thank you for taking care of me all this time. Thank you. Sasaki Kiyoshi closed his eyes contentedly and left with the dream. In the dead silence, Jiojing heard the sound of cracking. The sound of breaking sounded from inside his body and spread out, until finally, even the sword in his hand shattered inch by inch and turned into flying ash. It was unbelievable that there was such a bright and shining sword light in this world, as if a person's life was entrusted to this sword. Using only the illusory spirit to outline the incarnation of Wisdom King, thunder like the punishment of heaven fell. Then it was all over. He froze in place, lowered his head, and saw the rapidly spreading cracks on his hands and body. In that instant, his life, will, and soul were all destroyed by this resplendent sword. It was a merciless and merciless destruction. There was no room for maneuver or possibility. It was over. It was so sudden. But Jiojing's mood was incomparably calm. He didn't feel ridiculous, nor did he think about why he would die here in disbelief. Even if the hatred had not been vented, even if the plan had not been completed, just like a stray dog that had died in an alley, he calmly accepted this reality. He even had the spare time to think about what kind of hell he would fall into. But where in this world would there be a hell for him? After a person died, the origin substance would dissipate and the clear origin substance would rise, washing away the painful memories and returning them to the vast silver sea. The world after death did not exist. There is no hell, no heaven, only nothingness. Death was ugly, just like him. He deserved such an ending. In the trance brought about by the dissipation, he heard a voice from the past. Those were the words he had heard when he held the sword for the first time. You must be Jiojing. The unshaven young samurai squatted down and looked at the child in front of him. Nice to meet you. I'm your swordsmanship teacher. Just call me Sasaki. He tried his best to smile kindly, but the way he bared his teeth made him look like a monkey. It was so funny. Don't be afraid, he said. Swordsmanship is actually very interesting. Really? The child looked up at the adult in front of him, half believing and half doubting. I heard my father say that swordsmanship is very difficult and very dangerous. Although it is a little dangerous, it doesn't matter. The somewhat unruly man held the wooden sword and waved it twice. He looked back, as if he was showing off some treasure. Do you see it? It's not difficult at all. Swordsmanship is very mysterious. It can hear you speak. As long as you make a wish and persevere, you will definitely be able to achieve it. The samurai put his hands on his waist and suddenly asked, Jiojing-kun, do you have any dreams? I don't know. Don't you want to be a scientist and an astronaut? How rare. Then, what about the job you want to do? The child shook his head. I can't think of anything. Then, what about the things you must accomplish? The teacher bent down and asked seriously, that kind of thing there must be, right? Everyone should have thought about it. Jiojing was stunned and at a loss for a long time. Finally, he gathered his courage. I want to protect everyone. Is such a thing a dream? Father, brother, Long Jija who is always bullied, Flying Bird who loves to cry, Maki and Mieko who love to play the most, and Miss Hoopa. He didn't want to be invincible, nor did he want to become a powerful person. He just wanted to protect them and let them no longer be afraid. He wanted to let the lonely princess no longer worry and smile. He wanted to let them obtain happiness. Such a naive thing. Is it a dream? In the long silence, the child looked at his future teacher uneasily. He didn't expect to be ridiculed and despised. Instead, he saw a serious face. You are obviously a little brat, but your dream is the same as mine. Jiojing, you can't be underestimated. The samurai suddenly laughed proudly, reached out, and rubbed his hair. He told him, from now on, you are my competitor. Let's work hard together. Yes. The child nodded vigorously. Something was sparkling in his widened eyes. Just like that, in the morning light, he held his teacher's hand and walked away step by step, disappearing. Only the lonely, murderous demon was left in place, staring at them in a daze. After a long time, he smiled bitterly and lowered his eyes. Really, stupid. In the silence, Jiojing fell on his back, and there was no more sound, welcoming death. Outside the mountain, the old ape Ju Kawa, who was drinking, didn't speak again. It was as if he was still reminiscing that moment of sword light that was as solemn as a Buddha. After a long time, he raised his head and drank all the wine in the gourd in one gulp. Finally, he looked at the smile on the corner of the dead's mouth, sighed, and turned to leave. He didn't look back. Above the clouds, Hattori was still looking down. He smelled the residual burnt smell left behind by the thunder in the air, and his brows slowly furrowed. After the news of Ashikaga's death was leaked, Looming Hall couldn't wait any longer. Otherwise, he wouldn't have thrown out the trump card in such a hurry. That bolt of lightning that fell from the sky just now wasn't some natural phenomenon. On the contrary, there was only one person who would openly transform into lightning in such a domineering and unrestrained manner, passing through the reality and ignoring the prohibition to attack the Riken clan. Within the double walls of wind and thunder, the fourth-level ascendant who held the two great divine miracles, Kanda Kagenori. He had the two divine miracles of the heaven-shaking drum and the sorrowful hammer in his hands. He was known to be able to destroy an entire border with his strength alone, and had created an illustrious reputation in the infernal realm, the god of thunder. Through the secret method, he transformed his entire body into a thunderbolt. After breaking through the membrane of the free-form incarnation, he broke into Li Jian's home. Perhaps he couldn't wait to kill people to silence them and create evidence for the next step of dividing up the spoils of war. After his efforts on the surface were useless, he tore off his dignified mask and impatiently began to devour the corpses. That group of rotten old things had indeed become an obstacle to the High Emperor's great cause. Just as he was thinking, a firefly flew through the air and landed in his hand. It was an order from the throne, but when the fragmented firefly spread out, the order inside wasn't for him to secretly take action. Instead, it was for him to continue watching with folded arms. It was hard to understand this logic, but he had no choice but to obey. Then, when he lowered his eyes again, he discovered that the originally tyrannical and insolent lightning that descended from the sky had already disappeared. It was completely silent, as if it didn't exist at all. He couldn't even sense any aura that belonged to Kanda Kagenori. Hattori was stunned. Just what had happened? Beneath his feet, the multicolored paranirvana emitted a strange halo. Like a sinister smile, it silently devoured all the intruders. It was just a momentary daze. When Kanda came back to his senses, he had already passed through the membrane of paranirvana and entered deep into the demon realm. But there was only darkness in front of him. There was no sky above him, no earth below him. His surroundings were endless. Only the pitch-black liquid beneath his feet was squirming, converging into a boundless sea. Just where was this? Amidst the dissipating lightning, the traces of the heaven-shaking drum and the sorrowful mallet appeared. Finally, the traces of lightning interweaved to reveal Kanda's face as he looked around. Even with his magnetic field vision, it was difficult to see his true appearance in the darkness. It was as if he had entered a world that had already been destroyed. Apart from the stinky sea beneath his feet, there was nothing else. No, this wasn't even the demon realm anymore. This wasn't the effect of the Yatsufus's divine marks. Regardless of whether it was the paradise of King's Way or Paranirvana, he had personally experienced those domains before. He had even fought with the Riken clan's leader. Such a desolate and strange scene was definitely not created by the 8 virtues or 8 evils. The sorrowful mallet smashed down. The heaven-shaking drum rumbled, creating a mighty echo. A terrifying shockwave comparable to a missile strike spread out together with a blazing lightning, lashing out at this deathly silent and empty world without any warning. But there was nothing for him to destroy here. Only the viscous sea of darkness beneath his feet was squirming. A crack was torn open, and countless tiny teeth floated in the sea, slowly closing up. Water was impermanent. Kamita was stunned for a moment, but soon after, he struck the drum again. Lightning whistled out, sweeping out. Firepower that was enough to destroy an entire building spread out in all directions. Immediately after, he turned into a pillar of lightning again, flying through this endless world of darkness with a terrifying speed approaching the speed of light. But no matter how long he flew, he was unable to see the edge of it. Instead, the silent sea of darkness beneath his feet began to squirm, as if it was slowly recovering, ripples spreading out. The air became more and more stuffy. Only when the first bubble slowly rose from the sea of darkness did Kanda Kozin suddenly come to his senses. It was as if someone had locked him in a pressure cooker. Now, the sea was boiling. You finally noticed? An old face appeared above the cracked sky. It was as huge as the sky itself. Its lips opened and closed, and a mocking voice came out. How does it feel to be in the urn, Sir Uninvited Guest? In front of Guashuk, in the bamboo basket above the charcoal fire, a strand of lightning continuously jumped about like a snake. It was difficult to break free from the cage. This place was already under the cooking demon's blade. Chapter 679. Washuk did not move at all. From a moment he unfolded self-incarnation until now. He had been sitting in his rocking chair, lazily bathing in the bloody light, like an old man basking in the sun. Even if the sky fell and the earth cracked outside, it had nothing to do with him. He was too lazy to move. In the faint whine, he hummed the tune of the past intermittently, enjoying this moment of leisure as if he was sleeping. The filthy, bloody light and malice surrounded him, and immediately they fled out in fear, forming a faint, clear area around the small courtyard. Under the rocking chair, his shadow was like a ripple of water, wriggling slowly, changing between various ferocious outlines, faintly making sneering sounds. Compared to the malice and disaster entangling in his body, the so-called self-incarnation was not worth mentioning. At best, today's haze was just a little too big. How should he put it? It was quite exciting. In this slow rocking, he recalled the scene before he set off. The old customer who came to his door after a long time, an old acquaintance. Go to Ingzhou. At that time, Guashuk was carelessly cooking his pickled vegetables. The cooking demon competition? Forget it. I'm old. My body is stiff. I don't want to move. When you're too quiet, you should think about moving. It's not bad to move your legs occasionally. Xian Yao occupied his rocking chair, holding a bowl of white fungus porridge in his hand from the refrigerator. After entering the door, he did not stop talking. There should be some new things there. Maybe there will be a surprise. You shouldn't feel bored. Are you sure? Guashuk raised his eyes, somewhat moved. He was not afraid that Xian Yao would trick him. They had known each other for so many years. They had dealt with each other a lot. They knew each other very well. If Xian Yao wanted to trick him, he had 100,000 ways to make him unlucky. There was no need for him to come personally and waste his breath. Moreover, this guy never spoke without thinking. He would not act until he saw a rabbit. Guashuk had to admit that he was curious about the surprise from Xian Yao's mouth. He thought for a moment and asked, "What do you need me to do? Be a chef. Otherwise, why would I need you to fight and kill?" Xian Yao stood up again, grabbed a spoon, and poured himself a big bowl of soup. He continued to slurp. Just do what you want to do. Treat it as a public holiday. And then they fired you while eating hot pot and singing? Guashuk sneered. Besides, are you so sure that I will do things to your liking? Aren't we close? Mystic Bird raised his head and showed a loyal and kind smile. There was still a piece of tremella that Guashuk cooked last night on his beard. Arrangements were written all over his face. Although this old fellow was not very good at fighting, nor was he very good at dealing with matters. His performance among the ascendants of his generation had never stood out. The reason why he was able to sit on the position of the king of the lineage was not only because of his stability and willpower, but also because of his grasp of the general situation. He could always send the most suitable person to the most suitable place at the most suitable time. Intuitively, There was nothing that could not be done by that guy as a matchmaker. It was similar to the results obtained after using big data and a huge amount of information to match in the cyberpunk world. It was simply a match made in heaven, more useful than Cupid stuff. With this ability, he did not even have to bring money with him when he went to the wedding banquet. When he left, he could even bring a few red envelopes to thank the matchmaker. And every time, he had to bring back 2 pig heads from Washuk for free. He took advantage of the situation more than anyone else, but he still had to be thanked. Routines could be copied, and operations could be learned, but the ability and vision of operations could not be learned by others at all. Washuk shook his head and sneered. I always feel that you came to me for no good reason. Maybe these 2 pieces of old bacon will be thrown into the pit for you. I heard that the last time Kwafu went out to deliver a package for you, he was pressed to the ground and beaten by Tyr. He caused the trouble himself. What does it have to do with me? Mystic Bird widened his eyes innocently. He can't blame me for spitting everywhere. That depends on who sent him to spit. Washuk had a look of disdain on his face that said, I know you well. They were all old foxes for 1,000 years. Why are you acting like a strange story? Don't worry, don't worry. This time, you will definitely be very successful. Mystic Bird patted his chest and promised. Washuk did not doubt this. This kind of thing was like the sky was blue and people would die. As long as Mystic Bird said that you would be successful, you would be successful. Very successful, very successful. Just like when Baizé said that you were lucky, your luck would definitely be very good. As long as you took it slow and steady, you would eventually get what you wanted. But this kind of feeling of working for free made him very uncomfortable. You go to work, I will make money. Washuk had been taken advantage of by him many times. What was even more infuriating was that Mystic Bird actually picked up the spoon and made another bowl for himself. Don't eat it. I made a pot, and you almost finished it. Are you a Mystic Bird or a Mystic Pig? Washuk was angry. He snatched the spoon and stuffed it back into the refrigerator with the casserole. Get out, get out. You agreed? Mystic Bird smacked his lips and looked around. Did you see pickled mustard just now? Bring some back for me. The children are growing and need nourishment. 10 minutes later, he was driven out by Washuk, who was flustered and exasperated. In addition to the pickled mustard jar in his hand, he also carried an extra bun of bacon. He returned with a full load. Things were settled at that time. Kwafu went to the Abyss to deliver the express. Washuk went to Ingzhou to be a cook, and Mystic Bird went home to eat pickled mustard. Everyone had a bright future. Now thunder fell from the sky. Washuk finally raised his eyes from the rocking chair. There was no vivid white in his dark eyes. He quietly stared at the blazing light falling from the sky. He casually kicked the bamboo basket beside him. The lid of the bamboo basket was suddenly lifted. The darkness swayed, and a strange shadow flew out of it, reflecting on the blood-colored glass sky curtain. It was like a large and invisible mouth that casually swallowed the endless lightning into its stomach. Then it slowly shrank back. Then the lid of the bamboo basket slowly closed. Please enter the trap. Ingzhou is really a place with good feng shui. Washuk lowered his head and stared at the trembling bamboo basket. He slowly raised his eyebrows. There are ingredients delivered to my door while lying down? How interesting. Kanda Moriyaru? Who is calling me? Now, when the old face appeared from the shattered sky, Kanda smelled the ominous aura in the air. His mind turned quickly, and he recognized the familiar aura. He couldn't help but widen his eyes. You're a person of the Eastern Summer genealogy. You attacked a member of the Looming Hall on the territory of Ingzhou. Do you want to stir up the conflict between the 2 countries? Immediately unlock the secret here. You are thinking too much. You may be able to represent the Looming Hall, but this old man can't represent the Eastern Summer genealogy. At most, I'm just a chef passing by. Washuk laughed strangely. He raised his hand and increased the fire under the bamboo basket. He raised his head and said, in other words, you have not angered the Eastern Summer genealogy, but me. That strange smile and pitch-black eyes brought about an omen of unease. Looking at the strange scene around him, Kanda Moriyaru widened his eyes and shot out lightning with all his might. However, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't tear apart the sticky black sea. nor could he break free from this secret ritual. Instead, he felt the heat growing in his body bit by bit. Lightning, which was a plasma phenomenon, was actually afraid of burning. What is the meaning of this? He was furious. Aren't you the one who initiated the attack and started the trouble? You can't say it like that. Gwashuk raised his hand and sprinkled a handful of salt down. The fine salt fell from his fingertips and landed in the bamboo basket. It quickly enlarged and turned into a huge object that was the size of a mountain. It whistled as it entered the sea. It caused the boiling, sticky black sea below to become even more strange. Behind the countless bubbles, eye-like objects raised their heads and coldly looked at the god of thunder. The heaven-shaking drum was played loudly and lightning spread out. However, this time, the huge gravitational force was unable to disperse. Countless sticky limbs wrapped around teeth and endlessly stretched out towards the lightning in the air. Bit by bit, they wanted to pull him into the deepest darkness. A hoarse and deep laughter sounded from there. It was filled with malice and indescribable malevolence from the abyss. It mocked his resistance. Therefore, your looming haul, isn't it? Too arrogant? Other than smashing his stove, is there any other way to infuriate a chef? Gwashuk rubbed the garlic in his hand and unhurriedly took off the thin layer of garlic clothing. He leisurely told him, since this old man was born, for more than 190 years, there has only been one thing that I have thought about day and night. I have neglected sleep, but did not dare to forget to eat, and that is cooking. For cooking, this old man is willing to pay any price, even if I have to give up my life. But now, I have no wife, no children, and was betrayed by my own disciple. I have lost 1/3 of my sense of taste and all of my sense of smell. It is difficult to recover from this illness. Such a miserable life is hard to say. One of the few pleasures is just bullying the young. As he sighed, he crushed the garlic in his hand into paste and casually threw it into the bamboo basket. A spicy smell spread out. Like a giant iceberg, it stirred up the boiling Black Sea. As the Black Sea boiled, Gwashuk lowered his head and looked at his face. Now, after you have taken away my little pleasures, you want to blame me for stirring up trouble. This is too unreasonable, isn't it? He smiled and asked, isn't this too self-talk? At that moment, after not seeing it for decades, Kanda Kagami once again felt the feeling of his heart being constricted. That kind of smile was more unsettling than any cold words or ferocious expression. It was like looking at a fish on a chopping board. It was calm, peaceful, and full of anticipation. What do you want to do? Kanda Kagami asked in a low voice. Behind him, the heaven-shaking drum suddenly roared. The lamenting mallet in his hands broke and smashed into the drum, almost destroying itself. Brilliant lightning surged into the sky, turning into a sea of lightning that stretched for thousands of miles. Thunder God descends. In an instant, the bamboo basket was covered in cracks, and black fog rose up. A strand of scorching lightning shot out like a spear, piercing through Gwashuk's face and head and extending backward. Thousands of miles long, the blazing light tore apart the membrane of his embryo and shot out into the sky. However, after the head was shattered, what appeared was even more ferocious than the fragments. The spirit that had been frozen and entangled opened its thousands of eyes, looking at Kanda Kagami's stunned expression. It was still smiling. Don't be afraid. I'm just a chef. Why would I hit someone? The countless screams overlapped and gradually turned into Gwashuk's old voice. I just want to make a bowl of old soup to nourish my body. He raised his hand and closed the lid of the bamboo basket. It was time to make the soup. However, you must be careful. Gwashuk's shattered head slowly regenerated. His face closed, and when his lips opened, he spoke in a sincere voice. This was his final reminder. This pot of old soup that has been cooked in hell for tens of thousands of years can eat people. Chapter 680. It was rumored that in the beginning, all life could come from water. In the scholar's imagination, they needed a barren planet, a vast ocean, blazing high temperatures, endless rain, and tens of millions of years. Under the high temperature and stuffy air, the ocean would continuously boil, gradually cooling down, and then the most basic prokaryotic cells would be born from the most primitive chemical substances. This was the origin of life. When the time came, all living things would transform from this primordial soup, and because of this, they would be able to survive, develop, and strengthen, perhaps what those scholars said was reasonable, that there really was this type of possibility, that life could be born like this. Unfortunately, Washuk never had the chance to see it. Even if he didn't hesitate to enter the ranch master's domain, in the abyss below paradise, he still couldn't find any soil that could create life. In the end, all he obtained was this pot of remains that had already failed to nurture tens of millions of years ago. A pot of rotten primordial soup. The miracle that should have brought life had already been turned into a disaster that devoured all life, an undeniably dangerous and hidden danger. Anyone with a conscience should have destroyed it at the first opportunity. Unfortunately, Washuk didn't have this type of thing. On the contrary, the first thing he did was immediately attracted by this soup base that was still so active even after boiling for tens of thousands of years, completely enraptured. It was just so beautiful. Even if it had already died and failed, the corruption that remained within was just so enchanting. This curse and resentment that welcomed destruction before it was even born was just so cute. This wasn't the result of scheming, but rather the perfect crystallization of nature. This type of purity was just so enchanting. It was just like a miracle. And now, a miracle descended upon Kanda Aujin's head. Gentle and tolerant, he reached out countless hands, offering a hug. The bamboo basket trembled intensely. After shaking off the outer layer of broken bamboo, it unexpectedly revealed a white jade-like texture and cracks. An ancient and dignified aura flashed past the cracks, and soon after, everything returned to silence. Only the bamboo basket continued to tremble. At first, there was a loud rumbling sound, and then there was a faint, angry roar. There was constantly lightning, struggling angrily, pulling at the edge of the bamboo basket. But no matter what it did, it was unable to push open the lid of the vault of heaven and escape from within. From a moment Washuk said his name, and the moment he responded, everything had already been decided. Right now, cracks continuously appeared on Washuk's face and body. Under the scorch marks left behind by the lightning radiance, eyes opened one after another, carrying in different malice and mockery, disdain as they looked down on the devil realm he had incarnated into. In the end, the wailing sound gradually disappeared. A strange fragrance wafted into the air. As the fragrance lingered, the wounds and eyes on Washuk's body slowly closed and disappeared. It was unknown whether it was a jade bottle or a bamboo basket, but there was only the sound of boiling inside the container. A wisp of white mist rose in spirals from the crack, transforming into a strange scene of dancing fairies and heavenly maidens scattering flowers. Pure vitality spread out. He took a deep breath and let out a carefree moan. The soup was finally ready. Washuk smiled and took off the lid. He lowered his head and looked down. In the container, there was only a broken drum floating slowly in the clear soup. He took out a spoon, filtered out the debris, and casually threw it aside. Washuk looked at the clear soup in the pot and beamed. It had been a long time since he had encountered such beautiful ingredients. Otherwise, he would not have been able to make such a perfect old soup. Unfortunately, there was still something missing. He thought for a moment, rummaged through the box, and found a cabbage. After rinsing it with water, he tore off a leaf and threw it into the pot. Looking at the cabbage leaf rippling in the clear soup, Washuk nodded in satisfaction. This was the authentic taste. Perfect. When the sound of thunder in the distance came to an end, the blizzard finally dissipated. Accompanied by the shattering of countless icicles, the ferocious long knife crossed a distance of more than 40 meters and hovered at Vladimir's throat. The sharp tip of the knife gently touched his carotid artery. A cold voice came from behind the cracks in the layers of ice walls and giant pillars. "The work is over, Vladimir." Vladimir leaned against the wall. There were cracks on his face and body. As the divinity of the Frost Father gradually faded, the huge power was finally squandered. Gradually, it was beaten back to its original form. The power temporarily obtained through the demon culinary skill could not be maintained for too long. Once it was digested, the foundation of the Frost Father's descent into the human world would collapse. The power would return to the eternal frozen snowfield, waiting for the next summon. Perhaps there would not be a next time, but the miracle that eternally lingered on the ice field did not care. The ice field and the storm never cared about the thoughts and feelings of humans. In a tearing pain, Vladimir panted violently. Under the Frost Father's face, his tattooed face faintly appeared. "I can still fight, Miss Huaiji." He wiped away the blood at the corner of his mouth, not caring about the blade in front of his throat. "I know you can still fight." Behind the shattered ice wall, the burning figure of the ferocious blood-red light slowly appeared and looked at him calmly. "I also know that you must have something hidden that you have not taken out. I also hope that you will keep it hidden until the end of the competition. Your tricks may not work on me." In Huaishi's eyes, the burning origin substance shot out a dignified glow. It shone through the Frost Father's shadow. Vladimir's expression twitched. In the end, he sighed helplessly, raised his hands, and surrendered. However, Huaishir was not in a hurry to close the distance between them. He still maintained a distance of 10 meters. A small clue revealed the general situation. It was a passive effect brought about by the leveling up of the premonition of death. Huaishir could see the signs that were enough to endanger his life from the details. From the moment the battle began until now, this sense of danger lingered in his soul so intensely that he kept a distance from Vladimir. The corner of Vladimir's eyes twitched. His expression became more and more helpless. "Please don't worry, I won't use it. I don't want to kill you." "No, please don't misunderstand." Miss Huaiji smiled politely. "I'm just used to keeping a distance from people who want to suck up to me. After all, you guys always think too beautifully." In the silence, Vladimir's expression twitched. He sighed helplessly. He raised his hand, took off the frost crown on his head, and pulled off the pale gem. "What is that?" Huaishir asked. "The blessing of the ice wasteland." Vladimir shrugged. "However, most people call it the exile of the Frost Father. Those who are blessed will always be accompanied by storms and ice and snow, and will be completely pulled into the eternal ice and snow wasteland." The Frost Father's sacred mark was the embodiment of the eternal ice wasteland and storms. Moreover, now that the Frost Father was dead, unless there were other gods to guide them, those who were blessed would sooner or later freeze to death in that non-existent wasteland and turn into ice sculptures. They would merge into one with the eternal despair and silence. "It sounds quite interesting." Huaishir raised his hand, and the blade in his hand turned. He shook the flat blade, blinked his eyes, and smiled. "Don't you think that gem is a good match for me?" "Okay, I understand what you mean." Vladimir rolled his eyes. Like a real bootlicker, he raised the gem and obediently placed it on the blade. Huaishir didn't pick it up. The blade turned slightly, and the eternally cold gem turned into origin substance and was thrown into the lowest level of the bone burial sanctuary. Hopefully, no unlucky crow would activate it while it was rummaging around. "Then, thank you for your gift. Unfortunately, you're a good person. It's impossible for us to be together. I hope you won't pester me anymore." After saying goodbye skillfully, Huaishir took a step back and turned around. His footsteps paused for a moment, but the moment Vladimir heaved a sigh of relief, the reverse blade of hatred suddenly crossed a distance of more than 10 meters. It pierced through his thigh and nailed him to the floor. "What are you doing?" The thorn-green chef demon let out a miserable growl. He raised his eyes and glared angrily, but saw Huaishir's expression. "This little bit of blood, about 400 cubic centimeters. Just treat it as the interest for wasting time, Mr. Vladimir." Huaishir Susie nodded and said goodbye. "I hope you can have a good rest. I also hope you can pray with me that my client is safe and sound. Otherwise, both you and your boss will have to pay the price for this." He said, "I swear." In a gradually melting chill, what emerged was a bone-piercing, killing intent. Without looking at Vladimir behind him, Huaisher turned around and left. Dragging the blade of hatred, he sped in the direction of the crow's cry. Crisis alert. But by the time he arrived, everything was already over. He lowered his head and saw the heavily injured steel crow and the corpse on the ground. The color of blood gradually spread to his feet. Damn it, Huaisher closed his eyes. He was late. 20 minutes ago, after the illusion of the sky and earth spinning descended, everything in front of him became completely different. Jeanne, she raised her head in shock and looked around at the glass palace around her, as well as the dense blood light in the air. In her shadow, the steel crow suddenly let out a cry, spread its wings, and rose up to protect her, devouring the blood light that gathered around her. But the malice that spread through the bloodline could not be stopped. The malice that spread in the blood constantly triggered all the evil thoughts. Any moment of loss of control for a moment would lead to distortion and fall into hell. No matter how thin the Psi bloodline was, it would be infected and corroded by his Avalokitesvara. This was even more malicious than the rancher's sacrificial ritual. Ugh! Jeanne, she subconsciously bent down and vomited in a sorry state. Tears and snot almost flowed out until she was about to vomit bile. She felt as if she had fallen into a cesspool. She had no idea what had happened. It was not until she saw the vaguely arched and slowly crawling worms in the vomit that she retreated in horror and looked around. There were also other people screaming in fear. Right in front of Jeanne's eyes, the frightened maid suddenly fell to the ground. Her legs twitched violently and twisted into an almost strange angle. Through the skirt, she could vaguely see that the squirming limbs were no longer in a normal shape. Something was rapidly bulging, expanding, and multiplying in a deformed manner. When pairs of hungry eyes looked up and looked at her, Jeanne vaguely understood what was going on. Following Miss Huaisher's teachings, at this time, she first had to take a deep breath and try to show a very sincere and serious attitude. Then, she had to maintain her politeness and stand firm. Finally, she had to bow 90 degrees. Sorry for disturbing you. Goodbye. Chapter 681. After retiring from the club for a year, the former head of the track and field department of Daoquan Middle School, Maki Rimi, began to run again. Following Haoki-san's instructions, she didn't hesitate to run for her life when encountering strange situations. Wasn't this usually the case in TV dramas? Although she didn't do much when she was a teammate, she would definitely be 3 times stronger after being corrupted. In this kind of situation, the stun baton was completely useless. Not to mention, the stun baton was completely broken. It was too cumbersome to use it to smash people. So how could she win? The most important thing right now was to contact Haoki-san. But when she took out her cell phone and wanted to contact her, there were only 2 words on it. Outside, there was no cell phone signal at all. Moreover, she had already seriously and sincerely apologized to them according to Haoki-san's instructions, but these people didn't seem to have any intention of understanding at all. Instead, they chased after her even more fiercely. Why? Suddenly, there was a screech in the sky. A strange creature that she didn't know whether it was a bird or an insect flapped its huge bat wings and flew straight at her face. The 2 huge iron birds circling around her suddenly rose up and swept their sharp iron wings across. The crisscrossing iron light instantly disintegrated the ferocious monster. Only blood splashed down and landed on her face. Amidst the stench, she didn't have time to see clearly and tripped on the stairs under her feet. When she got up, she found that she had run into a dead end. She was surrounded by countless strange creatures in the bloody light. Holy! Holy! The iron crows screeched loudly again. A burning red light appeared on their bodies, and they swooped down once more. They easily tore apart the monster that pounced on them, then the second one, and the third one. But there was no end to those strange creatures. There were more and more of them, and she didn't even know where they came from. Amidst the chaos, a strange flying limb rolled to her feet. She subconsciously looked down and saw the sharp limbs and the traces left on the fingers. It was an expensive watch and a ring inlaid with a huge gem that could only be seen on TV. Maki froze for a moment. Then she seemed to finally understand something. She subconsciously covered her mouth and wanted to vomit, but nothing came out. She couldn't help but cry. She had seen that ring before. It was the aunt she had met once during lunch. She was as arrogant as the rich people on the screen. When she looked at a country bumpkin like her with contempt, her finger would press on the expensive ring on her index finger. Her posture was noble and dignified. But now it became like this all of a sudden. She didn't even know what happened. Just suddenly, in a daze, she vaguely understood something. Perhaps she would also meet with the same result. What followed was an intense pain in his bones, a swelling pain in his joints, and a severe blockage in his lungs. There was an itchy and swollen sensation on his forehead, as if something was trying to break through his skull and protrude out. Intense dizziness and pain. "No," she said. "No, she's is she's, s is she's is s, she's is s, s is. This was a mutation that he had experienced countless times in his nightmares. Every time he opened his eyes, he could feel the residual pain and uneasiness in his bones. She would become like that sooner or later. Just thinking about this made her lose her strength in fear. She was about to lose her balance. If Miss YG was here, she would definitely cry, right? Sitting on the ground, he looked like a child who was scared to tears by a horror story. However, other than asking Miss YG for help, she didn't know what else to do. "Junshi." In her daze, she heard a familiar voice roaring. "Junshi, are you there? Really?" The angry figure broke through the wall and suddenly rushed into the monsters, revealing a towering and cold figure. He raised his palm and chopped down. The sleeves of Ingzhou's long robe fluttered like flags. When a sharp hand blade chopped down, the sharp air blade of the sickle weasel spread out, turning into a sharpness comparable to a divine weapon. With a sweep, countless filthy blood spurted out. "Junshi, can you hear me? Junshi?" In the chaos, the middle-aged warrior who was stained with blood raised his head and looked at Junshi anxiously. "Don't be afraid. I'm here, and I'll come to save you soon. Uncle Jiaoshan." Junshi froze in place. Jiaoshan roared, clasping his hands together and holding them high as if he was worshipping Buddha. His expression was solemn and dignified. When a closed palm chopped down, it set off violent waves and air waves on the spot. Countless invisible blades slashed out in all directions, instantly plowing a huge gap in the monsters. Immediately afterward, Jiaoshan raised his hands and chopped the monsters into pieces one by one. Like a hero and a god descending from the sky, the man with a resolute face destroyed the people of the former Rygian clan one by one. He was unstoppable and merciless. When the last monster was chopped into meat paste, he turned around, raised his hand, and casually chopped at the iron crow that had just risen in the sky. The sickle weasel's air blade whistled past. Just as she was stunned for a moment, the iron crow fell with heavy injuries, twitching and whining. Before she could react, Jiaoshan had already walked towards her and hugged her tightly. "Great, it's great that you're fine." She was stiff in place, feeling his excitement and joy from the bottom of his heart. "Uncle Jiaoshan?" She looked at the excited man blankly. "Are you okay?" "No, I'm fine, very fine." Jiaoshan realized his gaffe and took a step back. His serious face couldn't hide the substantial peace. He smiled and nodded. "You're really not tainted by evil thoughts, Junshi. You're the only one in the Rygian clan who should be saved. Come with me quickly." He reached out, grabbed the girl's wrist, and hurriedly took her away. "Go." "Yes, let's hurry up." Jiaoshan walked in front and killed the monsters that pounced on him one by one. Jiujing should have activated Yatsufusa by now. Soon, the out-of-control Paranirvana should purify everything here. "There's not much time left for you." "Cousin Jiujing?" She was stunned. "Wait, Grandpa Inu Jiang and Junshi, they're all dead." Jiaoshan interrupted her words. His voice was flat. She couldn't see his face, but she didn't know why. But she felt that, when he said that, his expression must be very scary. But what about the others? She asked. What about the others? Maybe there are survivors. They'll all die. Jiao Shan's footsteps paused for a moment. When he turned back, his expression was so calm that she couldn't believe it. Those flies that compete for power and money around rotten meat have no value to be saved. Then what about Miss Kaisher? She subconsciously asked. What about Miss Kaisher? Jiao Shan didn't say anything and continued to walk forward. But Shi suddenly struggled, broke free from his hand, and stepped back step by step. Shi? Jiao Shan turned back, looking confused. There's no time to explain. Hurry. She was silent. Looking at his face, she asked softly, Did you do all this, Uncle Jiao Shan? Jiao Shan didn't say anything, but his cold expression had already explained everything. That gaze was too scary. She didn't dare to look at it anymore. Why? Aren't we all family? She suppressed her uneasiness, gritted her teeth, and asked with a trembling voice. Even if it's for money, for power, there's no need to do this. That's why you don't understand. Shi. Jiao Shan's eyes were filled with pity. Every one of them will do this. Only you won't. You're different from them. This is their retribution, not yours. He said, You still have a way out, Shi. What if I don't want to? Shi's eyes trembled. She turned back, looking at the crying crow on the ground not far away. Miss Kaisher, she'll die too, right? She's lying to you. Shi. Jiao Shan's eyes widened, and he roared in a low voice. Are you still attached to the false protection? She's Amber's person. She's only using you as a tool. I didn't come here to be someone's tool. Miss Kaisher also didn't use me as a tool. She interrupted his words. Her uncontrollable tone was like a scream. For so long, although Miss Kaisher never said anything warm and considerate, I know that she stayed to protect me. It's because I want to be the patriarch that she became my representative. I'm the one who dragged her into this. At that moment, she made up her mind. I'm sorry, Uncle Jiao Shan. She bent down and begged humbly. This is our agreement. I can't betray her. A promise is more important than life. Uncle Jiao Shan, isn't this what you taught me? Please don't force me. In the silence, Jiao Shan's expression gradually changed. It wasn't clear whether it was anger, disappointment, or it was a kind of numbing sorrow. As expected, you've changed too, Shi. He murmured softly and slowly raised his hand. Unfortunately, if that's the case, I have to, without waiting for him to forcefully take down Shi, in Shi's shadow, the third iron crow that had been hiding for a long time suddenly screeched loudly. In order to protect Shi, the burning wings rose with a compassionate green color and flew towards Jiao Shan. Ridiculous! Jiao Shan roared, his raised hand chopped down and instantly swept past the iron wings. His well-tempered hand chopped hard against iron, easily tearing its wings apart and completely cutting off its lower body. The iron crow whined and landed on the ground. It carried the fragrance of iris flowers. At that moment, a faint numbness spread, and the small wound on his finger, poison spread, causing him to slow down for a moment. It was less than a second. She shouldn't have run far. When he raised his head again with this thought, he saw the girl standing in the same place, and in her hand was a pitch-black gun aimed at him. At that moment, the girl's eyes, was it guilt, sadness, or pain? Jiao Shan couldn't tell. The only thing he could read was determination. I'm sorry, Uncle Jiao Shan. This time, I won't miss, silently repeating the words choked in her throat. She closed her eyes and pulled the trigger. With a luck of 10 million USD, mini trial mode, Lord of the Flies, activated. Intense light burst out. Chapter 682. You're so stupid and silly. You always like to think that you're smart. If only I could take care of you for a lifetime. In the past, many times her mother said this. But in fact, she knew that what she wanted to say was not the last sentence. What she wanted to say was, if only she could have a normal life. Laugh and cry like normal people. Walk under the blue sky. Don't be afraid of catching a cold after being drenched in the rain. Don't worry about falling down when running. Live a life of going with the flow like everyone else. Study, work, get married, have children, retire, and finally die peacefully or uneasily on the bed. Live a healthy life. Unfortunately, such a life was destined to not be with her. From the moment she was born, the world gradually changed. When this excessive physical strength developed to the point that running would cause her skin to crack, she already knew what kind of fate awaited her in the future. She had to make a choice. Make more choices than normal people. The more difficult life was, the more choices one had to make. The poorer one was, the more difficult it was to make a choice, because it was not the so-called choice of two, but the choice to give up one of the two. She gave up the curry pork chop, which was 300 yuan more expensive, and chose the cheap udon. She gave up track and field, which would damage her body, and chose a temporary stable physical state in life. She gave up the dream of a big city and chose to be a country bumpkin. She gave up the beautiful fantasy and chose to work and study in a down-to-earth way. Finally, she gave up the peaceful life in Daoquan village and chose the faint glimmer of hope. The more she gained, the more she gave up. She chose to live with nothing, to live like a weed. But from the bottom of her heart, she hoped. Perhaps, one day, she could be like Miss Huai, who was proud and strong and did not have to give up anything. But when the naive fantasy was torn apart, what came was the final choice, the final giving up. Before the consciousness reacted, the body had already reacted first. Just like what everyone had been saying all along. Perhaps idiots live by their instincts. Before pulling the trigger, Zhanxi had always maintained the numb indifference of a machine, because there was an invisible sharp blade that cut her open. Half of her indifference and calmness made use of every condition that was beneficial to her, such as the black card and the weapon. This wasn't a momentary impulse or a loss of control due to panic. Instead, it was a clear understanding of every possible outcome. He was so calm that it was as if he was solving a math problem. In order to keep his promise, he had given up on escaping. In order to protect Miss Huai, he had given up on saving the people in front of him. In order to save more innocent people, he had given up on his previous kindness. In order to stop everything, at that moment, she came to the final conclusion. She had to kill Uncle Jiaoshan. So Maki pulled the trigger. Only less than a third of the other half of himself was sobbing silently in the darkness where the bright light could not illuminate. He had given up all his extravagant hopes and fantasies, those happy futures and unrealistic dreams. This was her final choice. When a melodious sound rang in his ears, a fortune worth 10 million US dollars descended upon him. The light of judgment whistled and gushed out. Along with the pure destruction came a recoil comparable to that of a tank's main cannon, as well as a silent death. A beam of light, as thick as a thumb, crossed the short distance and accurately penetrated Jiaoshan's stunned face. It tore through his soul, broke out of his body, and whizzed out with a heat that was enough to evaporate the source substance. The red-hot iron needle drew a scorched red and dried track on the oil painting called the world, penetrating through the distance unreasonably. It tore through his fetal membrane and disappeared at the end of his vision. What followed was a long, deathly silence. Maki panted violently. The arm holding the Lord of the Flies trembled slightly. Her sleeves had already evaporated under the raging heat. But what was incredible was that her arm and bones were intact. There was only a small crack in the web between his thumb and index finger where he was holding the spear. That was the result of his muscles going out of control and tearing his skin apart, causing an insignificant injury. A miracle suddenly appeared, and then quietly left. Jiaoshan stared at the girl in front of him in shock. It was as if he hadn't realized what had happened. He just subconsciously took a step forward, then staggered, then took another step with a huge crack and bloody hole on his forehead. His lips opened and closed silently. It was as if he wanted to say something, but no sound came out. He tried to open his eyes wide, trying to find traces of the girl in front of him in the rapidly darkening world. In the end, his numb body fell forward. He groped around awkwardly and finally touched the shape of her cheek. Like a drowning person trying to grab a straw, He used so much strength. With difficulty, he smiled. What did he want to say? But at that moment, his movements froze. There was no more sound. Maki lowered her head in a daze. She noticed that the hand touching her cheek slowly slid down with traces of blood, and that calm face that didn't show any resentment until death. Just like that, her body fell to the ground bit by bit. She lost all her strength. She couldn't feel any emotions. In this short silence, she stared for a long time at the pair of empty eyes that gradually lost their luster. She tried to decipher the last words he wanted to say, but everything had left with death. There was no trace. Only the blood was cooling down bit by bit. This was the result of her choice. What she gave up. When Maki raised her head again, she saw Heike-san standing beside her. She didn't know when, but she saw her sad and silent eyes. She tried to smile, but in the end, she could only squeeze out an empty expression. Heike-san, why are there so many cruel things in the world? In the silence, Huaisher couldn't avoid that lonely gaze. He answered, probably, this is how the world is. This world was never gentle. Everyone only had one life. There were many things more precious than life. There were too many things to gain and too many things to give up. It had always been like this. It never changed. Heike-san, is it the same? Maki asked with a trembling voice. Yes. Huaisher nodded and said calmly, there's always a need to give up. It's always painful, and you feel sad. You don't know what to do. Then why? Why do you continue? Maki choked, unable to understand. Why do you have to live such a painful life? Why do you have to make a choice? Maybe it's for something more important? Huaisher squatted down and stared into her eyes. He told her seriously, Maki, people don't live for pain. We don't make a choice to give up. Although it's sad to give up something, if you don't make a choice, you won't be able to grow, and you won't have a future. Sometimes you have to make a choice. Give up something, and then get something else. Maybe there won't be a good result in the end, but if you don't make a choice, you won't have anything. People who stood still wouldn't understand this kind of sadness. He reached out and hugged the girl in front of him, comforting her softly. Everyone's reasons are always different. Maybe you think that I'm just boasting because it doesn't concern me, but one day you'll understand and have your own answer. Heike-san, She grabbed Huaisher's hand as if she was grabbing onto a life-saving straw. She had a lot to say, but her throat was choked. She couldn't speak at all. Only tears flowed down her face uncontrollably. Her initial sobs turned into uncontrollable sobs and coughs. She hoarsely yelled out words that she didn't understand. The pain that surged under the ice mountain suddenly surged out like a tide. It was hard to suppress. Just as she gave up on running away, she finally experienced the immense pain that came from constantly giving up, and the realization that came from the pain, her so-called self. The illusory light from the origin substance illuminated Huaisher's eyes. From Maki's body, the slowly forming soul glowed faintly. Her nature was sublimated. Huaisher froze in place. He couldn't believe it. It was sublimation. He never dreamed that he would be lucky enough to see someone else sublimate. This was the strange scene of the first spark being ignited, the consciousness transcending from the silver sea and forming a spirit soul. In just an instant, the brilliant and lonely light flashed and disappeared. The transformation was complete, and it returned to its original state. From then on, everything was completely different. In the dizziness, the crying girl finally fell asleep. It's sublimation? What talent? I didn't expect there to be a second talent comparable to Shojing in the Riken family. No, it should be said that this change is brought about by you. Behind Huaisher, a low voice sighed. Miss Huaisher, you are the creator of this miracle. Huaisher abruptly turned around in horror, her brows furrowed. He didn't know when another figure had appeared beside him. It was a middle-aged man that he had never seen before, but he seemed to know him. His face was handsome and dignified. His eyes were pitch black, without a single trace of white. There was an indescribable evil and madness in them. Just by looking at him, one could feel a strong sense of threat and uneasiness. But it was this feeling that made Huaisher feel extremely incredulous. You are. Was shook. You can see through me? The middle-aged man grinned slightly. His teasing tone was as usual. This old man said that he would give you a surprise. Your reaction is really fast. Huaishir subconsciously pressed on the Lord of the Flies beside Maki. Don't be so hasty. Guashuk waved his hand gently and took a step back. Don't worry. Although I have some bad intentions, I won't let my hands and feet loose. I don't plan to attack you. As he said that, he raised the pot that was still steaming in his hand and smiled proudly. I just made a pot of good soup. It's so nourishing that this old man is rejuvenated. Unfortunately, there's no one to share it with. Do you want some? The aroma was sweet and fragrant. It lingered at the tip of the nose. Smelling it from afar, it was enough to make one's mouth water. There was no doubt that it was a rare magic chef's dish. It could actually restore an old monster who was close to 200 years old to his middle-aged state. It was probably an excellent tonic. But why would this guy be so kind? Chapter 683. When he sensed Huaishir's suspicious gaze, Guashuk seemed to be helpless. This old man isn't some kind of demon, so why am I being treated like a tiger or a wolf? After returning to his middle-aged appearance, Guashuk no longer seemed as lethargic and gloomy as before. Instead, he gave off an elegant and refined aura, giving off a good impression of him. But even if one used their heels to think, they would know this guy wasn't a good person at all. Come on, the essence of good food is sharing. It's just like eating hot pot. Eating it alone doesn't feel very tasty. Guashuk pulled out 2 exquisite porcelain bowls from his sleeves, as if he were performing a magic trick. He handed them over and said with a smile that wasn't a smile, "Even if you don't drink, that little girl can drink some. She's just become an ascended individual, and she's also gone through a huge change. If you leave her alone, she'll fall seriously ill. You don't want her to have any lingering effects during her puberty, right? If she's not feeling well, she needs to drink more hot water. That's the principle." He lifted up the spoon, which was filled with clear soup. He poured it into the bowl, and as the white jade-like leaves rose and fell, the fresh aroma of vegetables began to spread through the air. Even though he believed that with Guashuk's skill level, he wouldn't have fallen so low as to poison a little girl who had just ascended, Huaishir tentatively took a sip. Then he froze in place. He felt as if he had swallowed a fragrance so thick that it was almost tangible. A trickle of warmth began to spread through his body, permeating his internal organs and causing him to involuntarily relax. He felt a sense of peace and tranquility that came from the depths of his heart. Immediately afterwards, Huaishir felt the physical strength and origin substance that he had expended during the battle actually began to rapidly recover. Even the crow on the ground, after Guashuk sprinkled a few drops of soup on it, quickly began to close up. Not long after, it was alive and kicking again. His body of steel had actually been healed by this dish. It didn't seem scientific at all. In less than half a minute, Huaishir had already recovered to his peak condition. Not a bit more, not a bit less. There were no abnormalities beyond Huaishir's control, nor were they weaker than Huaishir's previous standards. This wasn't a coincidence caused by the control of the quantity, but a natural recovery. It wasn't an alchemy potion because there was no sign of anyone strengthening or stimulating it, so naturally there wouldn't be any side effects. The only effect was the first mouthful. After drinking it again, the only thing that could be experienced was the delicious taste of the soup. There were no other special effects. After Huaishir fed her a bit of the origin substance, Shinichi's pale face quickly regained some color, and the origin substance in her body began to stabilize. Laogua's action had saved her millions of yuan in the cost of the medicine during the developmental period. Huaishir estimated that in just 1 minute, she had grown about 2 centimeters taller without a trace. Unfortunately, due to hybridization, the bones on the right side of his forehead had also grown a little, showing signs of mutation. In the future, as the development period ends, the characteristics should stabilize. By then, with the protection of the divine mark, he wouldn't have to worry about the distortion of his body. Suddenly, his heart was filled with mixed feelings. Plans always couldn't keep up with changes. Originally, he had planned to use the Yatsufus's blessing, but in the end, she had become a talent by herself, even better than he had expected. Could it be that he had misjudged her? Was she really a talent that was hard to come by in 10,000 years? But no matter how he looked at it, he just felt that silly Fufu was very gullible. He couldn't help but sigh. He finished the soup and put down the bowl. Another bowl? No need. Huaisher waved his hand and refused. If I drink more, I'm afraid I won't be able to stop. Is that so? What a pity. Guashuk refilled a bowl for himself and drank it with relish. Only Huaisher's eyes began to twitch. He suddenly realized maybe one bowl of this thing was fine, but drinking too much would cause problems. Where's Amber? When he looked around, he found that his stinky sister was missing. She's not with you? She has her work to do, Guashuk said calmly. Don't worry, I believe she'll handle the Yatsufus's matter well. What the hell? Huaisher was in a bad mood. You let her fight with the Yatsufusa? Even now, he could figure out that the changes here were related to the Yatsufusa. In the end, Guashuk, this old guy, was used to bullying noobs, but why did he let Amber go and deliver food to them? He subconsciously got up and wanted to go to the place where the rumbling came from. But a faint malice rose from behind him, causing him to freeze in place. I said, she'll handle it well. Guashuk sipped the soup and said seriously, this is her job, and it's only meaningful if she solves it herself. Neither you nor I have the right to intervene. Huaisher was angry. Then she has to be able to solve it, right? In the silence, Guashuk looked at him, and his eyes gradually became strange. Miss Huaisher, do you really think that the Dongsha genealogy really didn't prepare anything and just threw her back to Yingzhou? At that moment, there was a skyrocketing brilliance rising from his blood-red color. Like a torrent gathered by the light, it rose to the sky and dispelled all the evil thoughts that filled the air. It formed a huge, square outline in the sky, covering the sky and the earth. It reflected the mortal world. In the illusionary mirror, there was a projection on the earth, and everything was clear. It was like a mirror, the mirror of the sky. Now, the mirror hanging in the sky reflected all the malice in the mortal world. A solemn aura spread out in the bronze luster. What was shining from it was the cold light of killing intent. What's that? Feeling the sharp edge contained in it, Huaisher felt that his jaw was about to fall to the ground. He suddenly wanted to wake Zhan Shi up and look at God. What the F***CK is this thing? When Emperor Gaozu first entered the Xianyang Palace, the Zhousing warehouse was filled with treasures that couldn't be described. The most amazing thing was there was a square mirror 4 feet wide and 5 feet 9 inches tall. It was bright inside and outside, and when people looked at it directly, they could see the intestines and the 5 internal organs. It was vivid. Emperor Qin Shi Huang often used it to illuminate people in the palace, and he killed anyone who dared to be tempted. Guashuk put down the soup bowl and sighed. That was the holy item illumination that could distinguish between good and evil, see through evil, and use the law to wipe away the evil intentions of killing people. If we trace it back, it'll be interesting. Heh, that guy Xian Yao always had a lot of bad ideas. In the long silence, Huaisher looked up at the huge mirror in the sky, then looked down at the weak and pitiful Beelzebub in his hand. Look at other people's tricks. Look at your tricks. Huaisher rolled her eyes, suddenly feeling a burst of dullness. Close it, Hoopa. It's boring. Under the reflection of the mirror, his demonic realm was quickly falling apart. Just like the tyrannical kings in history, they used disasters to illuminate people's hearts and then violently cut off all evil thoughts. Under the illumination of the illumination, all things were revealed. Squeak! A manic voice came from behind the ferocious armor. The 8th branch was furious. The sword slashed down again. Sparks flew, and a deep crack appeared on the long sword in Hu Po's hand again. From the crack on the sword, a sharp cry like a baby's cry burst forth. Are you surprised, father? Hu Po nonchalantly flicked away the blood on his wrist. He raised his left hand and took off the Prajna mask on his face, revealing his beautiful face. His expression was calm and peaceful. She said, "A few days ago, I finally made up my mind to advance." In her hand, the mask condensed from hatred silently shattered. From behind her, a pair of pitch-black wings slowly appeared and spread out. The cry, like a baby's cry, became clearer, and a ferocious projection of herself faintly appeared, and a fierceness that was not inferior to the eighth branch. Behind Hoopa, a ferocious bird spread its slender neck and swallowed the disaster of the eighth branch in large mouthfuls. Dark green flames shot out of its eyes. After giving up on the path that was monopolized by Seat, Hooper relied on the miracle that was born from the same origin code without any obstructions and completed the advancement. After fusing with the incontinent system, this was the third stage of the Dongsha system's Guifeng path. Heavenly Emperor Girl, Guhua, under the suppression of the illumination mirror, countless evil thoughts that had lost control dissipated from the demonic realm. Then, they were attracted and swallowed by the dark vortex stirred up by Guhua. It was as if they were constantly losing blood and being preyed on by evil beasts. Squeak! The eighth branch roared and let out a sharp cry again. But in the sky, an even sharper sound burst forth and suppressed the eighth branch, who had turned into a disaster to the point of being unable to move. Behind the illumination mirror, a pitch-black silhouette slowly appeared. It was the miracle that had been sealed in the mirror. The huge, amorphous body constantly danced like thick ink, but it was restrained by the ancient illumination mirror and could not break free. And from within, 9 strangely long shadows slowly spread out, as if they wanted to envelop the entire 9 provinces under the shadow. They turned into 8 majestic and cold bird heads, and a headless neck. Like a waterfall, the dark blood poured down from the wound on the neck, irrigating the stigmata behind Hoopa. The tremendous power of the same sequence used this as a bridge to complete the connection once again. Just like the sacred mark relic that belonged to her, Guhua's power temporarily surpassed the limit of the 3rd stage and stepped into the 4th stage, or even the peak of the 4th stage. 9. Phoenix? Why sure, who was looking at the sky, was stunned. How could he not recognize this thing? This was the hidden boss of his first debut, the beautiful memory he shared with Hoopo's stinky sister. Back then, they fought to the death for a single head. Now that he thought about it, it was really cute. But the important thing was, wasn't this thing already dead? The Dongsha system actually restored it. Chapter 684. You even know about this? It seems that your relationship with the Eastern Xiao lineage is deeper than I thought. Guishuk heard him talking to himself, and immediately shook his head. He sighed with emotion. If you ask me, this kind of trash has already been thrown to those rags in the abyss. As for the mystic bird, it has become stingy as it gets older. I feel that it can still be used after being repaired. Cut the extra part with the white wolf hook, sew it up, and use it as a brand new one to trick children. It's so shameful to catch a sheep and pull it to death. Huaishur suddenly felt that it was raining from the sky. Tears fell like rain. Trick children? I'm also quite young. Why didn't the mystic bird trick me? Giving a divine artifact with a sacred mark? Is it going to give me a miracle mark? Why didn't you say earlier that the Eastern Xiao lineage has such good benefits? I also want such a shameful life. Now, with the blessing of the 9-headed phoenix, the miracle known as the Heavenly Emperor Girl stepped forward. Guhua, a miracle that coexisted in the entire Asian region. Not only Eastern Xia and Japan, but also Xinhua, Beach, and even India had derived legends. This was the choice given by the mystic bird after careful selection. Such an advancement would not damage any legitimacy of the Riken clan successor, and it could be connected seamlessly with the prajna that was maintained by absorbing resentment. More importantly, it was a sacred mark that originated from the Guifeng. It could be connected to the 9-headed phoenix and obtain the possibility of returning this damaged divine mark to the 5th level again. Gaozong defeated the Guifeng in 3 years. Since the ancient Shang dynasty, after Yin Gaozong and Wuding conquered the Guifeng, this miracle path named after the Guifeng had a congenital deficiency. As the collection of divinity of the Shang dynasty, the destined mystic bird, had contributed greatly in this process. The miracle revered by the Guifang tribe, the totem worshipped by the Guifang tribe, also had the same divinity as the phoenix, the sacred bird that covered the Jui and swallowed the world, but it fell into a demon like the ghost chariot. The main body of the origin of the Guihua bird was also split from this fallen divinity and became an evil spirit that robbed and strangled children. In order for the miracle of the 9 phoenixes to be upgraded once again, the heavenly fate would have to merge with the country and faith once again, becoming an existence that protects the country once again and developing once again. Unfortunately, such a method would never work in the Eastern Xia Kingdom. Even if Mystic Bird had Alzheimer's and suddenly died and was replaced by a 3-year-old child who knew nothing, it would never allow the existence of the dragon bloodline to be tarnished or interfered with. This was the foundation of the entire Eastern Xia lineage, the beautiful crystallization of the heavenly dragon's will, and the location of the Eastern Xia origin codex. Even if the painting scroll was burned, the white wolf hook was smashed, and the 9 continent cauldrons were sold for scrap, it would not shake the sacredness of this dragon in the slightest. Otherwise, it would not have been a 9-headed phoenix, but the phoenix. After extracting this portion of divinity, the East Xia dynasty would immediately return to its terrifying glory days of having 2 natural enemies, father and daughter. The existence of the weapon grandmaster and the phoenix would support the entire East Xia dynasty for at least 300 years. There was nothing more foolish in the world than draining the pond to catch the fish. With such a large family and business, why would they waste their capital for no reason? However, Upa was different. Even if Yingzhou had long abolished the existence of the Chinese in name, the Rigian clan's orthodoxy in the Anfang nation was not shaken at all. The entire Yingzhou was still secretly maintaining the existence of the feudal system. Once Hupa moved into the Rigian clan, the 9-headed phoenix would be equivalent to merging with the Anfang nation. Through the veins formed by the origin of the lineage and the long history, it would become a nail nailed into Yingzhou by the Eastern Xia lineage. At that time, he would be able to steal the Wi-Fi next door however he wanted. However, there was a huge weakness in this plan. No matter how much Mystic Bird secretly helped Hupa, how much he hindered his competitors, and how he secretly removed most of the pressure from America, the Russian Federation, and Rome, Hupa still needed to be strong. Hupa himself had to have absolute strength and an absolute advantage to move into the Rigian clan. Therefore, he still had to prepare for both sides. In the battle between the chef and the demon, Guishuk would be able to suppress and sweep everything. If anything were to happen and they needed to turn hostile, apart from Huaishur, who was a heaven-ranked tool, as an additional insurance, Hupa himself was also given a necessary trump card. And now, this power was floating in the sky. The sharpness that was enough to conquer the country was revealed here. It descended from the sky. I know, this is the Xinyuan sword, right? Huaishur clapped his hands and excitedly came to a conclusion. Beside him, Guishuk's eyes were about to roll to the sky. Was he dreaming? The Xinyuan sword? If this thing was really left behind, Mystic Bird would not let go even when he was sleeping. If others wanted to take a look at it, they would kill his entire family. How could he casually take it out? This kind of proof of power that was equivalent to the country's authority. Unless the entire dragon vein was drained, it was impossible to materialize it. Before that, the Asian branch of the Astronomy Society would explode on the spot. The Central Decision Room would collectively rise to the sky, and the undead of the Pioneer Society would open their coffins and rise. Why did Xia take out the authoritative relic that had created the new era, established the country's unity, and accumulated nearly 6,000 years of history and countless miracles for no reason? Were they planning to gamble on the country's fate and start an all-out war with the Russian Federation? Or were they planning to dig out the foundation of the current realm and play house in hell together? Aren't I just livening up the atmosphere? Huaishur touched the small pistol in his hand, feeling very disappointed. Comparisons are odious. Beelzebub, you're already a mature record of fate. You should learn how to make money for yourself. Beelzebub did not want to speak. At this moment, Huaishir felt the resonance and shock from Xiaoxi Ming's divinity, as well as the indescribable sharpness and deterrence. His eyes stung. He could not look directly at the terrifying aura that was slowly transforming from the ancient mirror. He could feel the enormous power that was brewing inside, like a nuclear bomb. If the earthquake was not contained and allowed to erupt, perhaps half of Nara would be destroyed by the aftermath of the earthquake, right? What was even more unbelievable was that even so, it did not trigger the alarm of the Asian Astronomical Association. In other words, the existence of this weapon had been officially registered and recorded in the Astronomical Association system. It was recognized as compliant with the procedures and could be used. It just used the power of the white wolf hook to trace the miracle of the ancient mirror of gallbladder back to its original form. Its essence is not changed. I can only say that the mystic bird is getting more and more evil. Guashuk raised his eyes and stared at the cold light whistling in the sky. In the 59th year of Wu Ding's reign, he used the second noon of the first year to forge a sword. It was 3 feet long and was inscribed gallbladder. That sword was the symbol of destroying the Guifang and severely injuring the nine-headed phoenix. It was the projection of the sword that destroyed the nation. Miracle imprint, gallbladder. Its essence was to entrust the fate of the entire Shang dynasty to the mystic bird, which symbolized its destiny. It was converted into pure mass and rose to the sky, transcending the shackles of the earth and breaking through the limits of the dome. From the darkness of the universe in outer space, the miracle would be reversed into a disaster. The punishment of annihilation would be delivered to those who dared to disobey. His form incarnation shook violently and cracked. Under this terrifying power that was enough to destroy the Guifang in one blow, the rising bloodlight quickly dissipated. At that moment, Amber's eyes drooped. "It's almost time to say goodbye, Father." Behind her, cracks gradually appeared in the projection of a Ubisoft bird. When a miracle imprint that once destroyed the Guifang descended, it also brought a deep and great pain to the miracle of the Guifang's path. When the demonic realm was destroyed, this double-edged sword was also killing the nine-headed phoenix and Amber. This was a feeling that she had been yearning for. She could finally empathize and experience everything that her father had gone through. Screech. The blood-stained 8th room shook violently. The instinct formed by the convergence of evil thoughts shrieked in fear. But this time, she could finally hear that blurry voice clearly. It was the call of the shattered soul imprisoned in the deepest part of the demonic realm. That was her name. Countless times it was painful, numb, sad, and reluctant to part with her. Amber, at that moment, the mask shattered. In the empty darkness, a cracked and blurry face appeared. Its empty eyes stared at the girl in front of it. Looking at the face that had never faded in its memory, turbid tears flowed out. Was it resentment or love? It was already difficult to distinguish between the two in the chaos. Whether it was love or hate, it had already been completely wiped out by his form incarnation. All that was left was his last obsession. He called her name, again and again. "Amber, Amber, Amber. I'm here, Father. I'm right here." Amber whispered softly. Step by step, she stepped forward. She ignored the sharp aura of the shattering Vajra sword and constantly cut open, terrible wounds on her body. "Please don't worry." She smiled and gently told her father, "I've been living well these years. I've grown, learned new skills, bought new clothes, made new friends, and lived a different life from before. During the holidays, I can eat fish. During the new year, I'll be invited to a reunion dinner." She said, "This time, I come back to say goodbye to you." Screech. In a huge disaster, the lost souls roared angrily. They were filled with resentment, because there was a metallic light gathering in her hand. Like scorching molten iron, it emitted a blazing light. It burned the resentment of the souls in her palm. Endless darkness rose from her fingertips. Following, there was an intense pain that penetrated deep into her soul. "I'm sorry, Father." She calmly walked forward and stared at the gradually blurring face. "I didn't fulfill the promise between us. I'm sorry. I left you here alone for so many years. Then, I ran away selfishly. I'm sorry. It must be very sad to be imprisoned in that kind of darkness with no way to escape, right? I was the one who asked you to sacrifice yourself, but I was also the one who couldn't fulfill my duty. Because I couldn't bear to, I created this kind of terrible result. Please don't worry. Soon, you won't have to suffer anymore. You won't have to be afraid anymore. She smiled with difficulty. Holding back her tears, she told him, "This time, I will kill you with my own hands." Yatsufusa roared. He raised the shattering Vajra sword and slashed forward under the boundless pressure. The destructive blade, formed by the entanglement of countless evil thoughts, turned into a bloody light that spread and swallowed everything. It was precisely at that moment that a sharp and bright light broke free from the sea of blood. It rose up like a bird and soared vigorously, cutting through the tens of thousands of waves. Just like tears, it flashed and disappeared. In Chapter 685. What happened to the plot of turning the tide? In the roar of the demon realm's destruction, Huaishir sat on the stone and began to ponder. After watching the whole process, he only felt a chill. On such a hot day, his hands and feet were cold. When can we as tools stand up? I didn't seem to have done anything at all on this trip. That's it? Solved? Huaishir looked at Guoyashuk doubtfully. Will Looming Hall intervene next? That's someone else's job. We don't need to care. Guoyashuk said, what about the interference and influence of other forces? There are people in charge. And then? Huaishir asked. And then, there is no and then. Guoyashuk finished the last drop of soup in the bowl and put down the porcelain bowl. When he raised his head, he saw that from the broken palace, a majestic warrior in armor slowly walked out. Wherever he passed, the sacred aura of the paradise of the king spread, extinguishing all the resentment in the air. That was when the dark side was swept away. The solemn and sacred glazed armor was revealed again. Yatsufusa. After killing the gathering of demonic thoughts, all the power of his incarnation had been swallowed by Guhua and Geophone. Now, Hoopa was in an unprecedented heyday. Under the blessing of the stigmata relic, Yatsufusa, she was already the head of the Rigian clan, the king of Enfang Kingdom. That's great, that's great. Huaishir clapped her hands and congratulated him. Congratulations, Hoopa. That's it. That's great, that's great. Since the work is over, I can't stay any longer. I'll take my leave now. As for the Yuji treasure, let's talk about it next time. That's all. After that, he picked up the unconscious Zhen on the ground and wanted to run. Then he saw, was shook in front of him. Miss Huaishir. The middle-aged man with evil intentions showed a strange smile. You don't think it's over, do you? What? You want to cook the rabbit? Huaishir raised his eyebrows. That's not good, is it? I thought the Dongxia genealogy was all about credibility. No, it's just that I haven't finished my work yet. Guoyashuk was still smiling. Look, the chef and demon duel isn't over yet, is it? Without this link, the legitimacy of the Hoopa family's patriarch will also be questioned. He said, you and I have not finished our work yet. His eyes were like those of a predator, staring fixedly at Huaishir, not allowing him to leave. Huaishir frowned. Even if you reopen it now, there are no judges. That's easy. I have it with me. Guoyashuk lifted his foot and stomped on the bamboo basket. Suddenly, from the darkness inside the bamboo basket, two wretched figures covered in mucus were spat out. As soon as they came out, they screamed in terror, completely unaware of what had happened. They were the emissary of the High Emperor and his attendants. Look, the judges are here. Guoyashuk spread his hands. The corner of Huaishir's eyes twitched as he continued to retort. Even if there are judges, there won't be any atmosphere without an audience, right? That's even simpler. Guoyashuk clapped his hands and looked around. His low laughter echoed throughout the entire Rigian family manor. Soon, one wretched or neat figure after another walked out from the shadows and corners. Without exception, all of them had complicated expressions. When a sudden change occurred, most of the candidates and chef demons were implicated. Before they understood the situation, In order to protect themselves, they chose to help each other and defend themselves. Although they were ruthlessly pranked, other than a few unlucky ones, most of the chef demons and candidates were unscathed. It was just that they were a little miserable. In the end, they didn't expect that after the dust settled, Hoopa had already taken control of the 8th branch and was the rightful heir. As for the elders in charge of the household, the 8-hound warriors, they were either dead or injured. They didn't have the ability to manage the household. There was no lack of ambitious people who took the initiative to secretly form alliances and seek opportunities. However, after witnessing Zhao Dan's might, those who still didn't give up were doused with cold water by their own chef demons. Brother, forget it. Even if you want to die, this isn't the way to do it. We have this world. Isn't it good to lick the new master's boots? Some people felt that it wasn't good, but they didn't dare to say it. They had already made up their minds to go to the capital to cause trouble. However, no matter how much they cursed in their hearts, they could only smile. You've all watched for so long. So are you free? Are you willing to watch the competition? Guashuk smiled warmly. It's free. I won't take any money. Everyone's expressions instantly turned ugly. They had barely managed to survive, but before they could catch their breaths, the position of master was gone. Now that Guashuk had forced them to become enthusiastic spectators, no one would be in a good mood. Moreover, who didn't know what kind of person Guashuk was? Could it be that he came from Dongxia and was a great philanthropist? Look, there's an audience. Guashuk turned around and smiled as usual. The venue is ruined. I'm not in the mood. Huaishir was expressionless. Easy to solve. Guashuk took out an iron whistle from his pocket and blew it. Immediately, the ground shook and a dwarf jumped out. The dwarf had 2 advertising signs on his head. As soon as he jumped out, he shouted loudly, "The Sea Construction Company is at your service. 5 hours. There, fix it." Guashuk took out 2 golden objects from his sleeves and threw them into the dwarf's arms. The dwarf nodded ecstatically. No need for 5 hours. 3 hours will do. Do you need renovation services? Do you have any special requests? Do you need to register for a membership? No, get lost. Guashuk kicked the dwarf away, showing the arrogance of a rich man. Finally, he looked at Huaishir. Do you have any other requests? Huaishir glanced at him and slowly shook his head. Zhen, she has already given up on the master selection. Unfortunately, she hasn't officially given up. Moreover, she has to announce it herself. Guashuk shrugged and said sympathetically, "What's even more regrettable is that she's now in her puberty period. After drinking the soup, she'll grow quickly and sleep. Well, the whole process will take about a week. Before that, you're still her representative. This is the final challenge, Miss Huaishir. What we're fighting over, and betting on is the wealth of the entire Riken family, all the assets of the Guanshan group, and even the royal power of the Anfang kingdom. I'm afraid you can't refuse." "So you agree?" Huaishir looked in Hu Po's direction. The tired Hoopa sighed helplessly and took off his helmet. "Sorry, I've already told him before that he won't interfere in the Riken family's matters. However, I have to listen to him regarding the cooking competition. To be honest, the old man is very hard to please. If you can't, just make a dish to fool him." "But what if I win?" Huaishir asked doubtfully. "Then won't you be miserable?" "Hey, Hoopa!" Guashuk and everyone else were stunned on the spot. They looked at that confused and serious expression. They didn't know if he was talking in his sleep or if he really felt that way. In the silence, Guashuk frowned. He moved closer and looked at him carefully. It was as if he was looking at a strange husky that had run out of zoo and was spitting saliva everywhere. He couldn't understand. "Are you serious?" "Why not?" Huaishir asked calmly. "Who would reject the chance to completely defeat a self-righteous old man like you and trample him under their feet? Or would they be fooled by your strong appearance? Mr. Guashuk, although I don't know what happened to you, my intuition tells me that the current you is far from what you used to be." He said, "At least you can't make me feel afraid." Just like that, it penetrated the weakness under Guashuk's robust face. The premonition of death was still there, but it was no longer a crazy warning like before. Instead, it had become some kind of faintly discernible warning that was constantly changing. It wasn't like the feeling of helplessness that he had when facing the endless sea. Now, Gwashuk had become more and more mysterious, like a monster that was wriggling and crawling in the fog. However, there was one thing that Huaishur could be sure of. Now, Gwashuk, who had returned to his youth, was at his weakest. Gwashuk didn't say anything. He only narrowed his eyes, as if he was enraged. The eternal darkness in his pitch-black eyes was boiling, but it vaguely leaked out wisps of lightning. The long hair behind his head wriggled like a snake. From it, deformed eyes opened one after another, looked at Huaishur, and then quickly disappeared. It was as if the human-shaped film wrapped around the abyss was about to be torn apart, and endless disasters would pour out. "You're right, Miss Huaishur." The corners of his mouth slowly raised, revealing a happy smile. "Now, I'm indeed in my weakest state, and it's the most advantageous time for you. However, Miss Huaishur, if you want to deal with an opponent who has been sick for a long time and can't recover, and is just in the final radiance of the setting sun, what should you do?" "Delaying tactics." Huaishur replied without hesitation. "Poison, cast curses, disturb the balance, and directly ignite the illness from the inside, so that the excessive disaster in your body will go out of control and make the strong collapse." And so, Gwashuk laughed, happily rubbing his hands and praising. Very good, Miss Huaishur, you're a qualified opponent. No mercy, no mercy. His pure pursuit of victory and defeat is truly admirable." Then, he slowly raised his pure black eyes and asked softly, "Do you dare to challenge me? Now I'm standing here in my weakest state, in my most powerless state." The cooking demon who had cooked the thunder god grinned and asked, "Even if the disparity between victory and defeat is great, even in such a situation, it's still overwhelmingly disadvantageous for you. Do you also want to challenge this limit that you can't reach?" "Of course." Huaishur looked into his eyes and said calmly, "Times have changed, old sir. The future belongs to the young. It's time for you to step aside, isn't it?" "When?" "How about tomorrow?" Huaishur said, "Tomorrow at noon." Gwashuk nodded. "Very good. Then it's a promise?" "A promise can't be taken back." Huaishur glanced at him one last time, helped Zhenshi up, and turned to leave. Even after walking very far away, he could still hear the piercing laughter that covered the sky, as well as the indescribable excitement and anger. As Huaishur turned the corner, he felt his legs go soft. He was sweating profusely. He was afraid that the old man was really angered by him. Because in a moment of anger, his blood rushed to his head, and he acted too pretentious, which resulted in too much hatred. By the time he reacted, it was already too late. But what's done can't be undone. What should I do? In his panic, Huaishur looked up at the two-person tall wall of the Rigian family. Then his eyes lit up. What does Huaishur's cooking demon duel have to do with me? Huaishur. So be it. Chapter 686. In the end, Huaishur didn't run away. Of course, it didn't mean that he had moral integrity or that he was ready to die. It was just that Hoopa had sent him a message. Lao Guo is so mad at you that he's about to explode. Good luck to you. P.S. If you leave this mess to me and run away, I'll sell your cross-dressing photos to Tomorrow News. The moment he saw this message, Huaishur gave up on running away. It didn't matter if his identity was exposed or not. The most important thing was that he couldn't cause trouble for little Hoopa. You've grown up, stinky sister. Huaishur replied with a gratified message, and then immediately blacklisted this wicked woman who had changed her mind. Finally, he sat on the chair and began to think about how to die. In the end, was it because of the negative comments after his identity was exposed? Or would he be ravaged to death by Lao Guo's cooking? Both of them would suffer the same pain, and the process would be equally long. It was hard to decide. In the middle of the night, Huaishur hesitated for a long time after pacing back and forth for a long time. Finally, he called the almighty hotline of Heavenly Dog Mountain. "Mr. Longshan Fong, I have a friend." On the other side of the phone, Longshan Fong coughed. "Huaishur, Kuan, we're already very familiar with each other. You don't have to be so formal." "No, I mean I really have a friend. Longshan Fong was silent for a long time, and then asked straightforwardly, Huaisher Kun, is your friend very familiar with you? Huaisher rolled his eyes and raised his voice. Anyway, I have a friend. Okay, I got it. Longshan Fong was helpless, and Aston and I know everything tone. And then, Huaisher's voice suddenly became hesitant. After a long stutter, he asked uneasily, she accidentally accepted a challenge from a Dongxia cooking demon, an old man named Guashuk. May I ask if there's any crash training class on Heavenly Dog Mountain that can teach her some tricks to turn defeat into victory? Silence, a long silence. It was not until Huaisher thought there was something wrong with the phone signal that he heard a dull voice from the other side. Huaisher Kun, your friend. Dragon Mountain Square thought for a long time and finally asked, does she want to eat something good? She doesn't want to, thank you. Huaisher was furious. I'm not joking. I know. The Dragon Mountain Workshop's tone became heavy. Huaisher Kun, I understand your feelings, but this kind of thing is completely. After repeatedly confirming that the Guashuk mentioned by Huaisher was the same Guashuk that they knew, Dragon Mountain Square became even more distressed. Mr. Huaisher, 80 years ago, when Mr. Gua, as the most famous culinary demon in the whole of Eastern Xia, was invited to Mount Tiango for guidance, I hadn't even entered the door yet, although it's rumored that he retired due to his injuries. If he were to fight the human cooking demon again, I'm afraid that in the entire Tengu Mountain, only Dai Tengu would be able to win against him, right? Therefore, the people of Yingzhou were really tactful with their words. Huaisher translated what he meant and found that it was actually very simple. There's no hope. Just wait for death. Goodbye. Is there really no other way? So, brother, aren't your expectations of us a little too high? Dragon Mountain Workshop sighed. It's a pity. Although Mount Tiango is somewhat famous among the culinary demons, it's not to the extent that it's unbeatable. After all, in this world, there are still sacred places like Mount Shaosher's fragrant kitchen, Tianju's sacred river, Nordic Golden Palace, Rome's Anton Nun's house, and so on. Even among the nameless, there are hidden dragons and crouching tigers. You're talking about that Miss Huai Shiki from not long ago, right? In fact, I've also heard about her performance in the past few days. Even Dai Tengu praised her for her ingenuity in using her skills. However, there's still a huge shortcoming that hasn't been fixed. Huaisher was stunned. What are you referring to? Compared to creation, Miss Huai Shiki is more inclined to use, right? Dragon Mountain Workshop hit the nail on the head. She doesn't have any interest in forging ahead on the path of the culinary demon. To put it bluntly, she doesn't treat culinary skills as a pursuit, but purely as a tool, just like a bartender. Of course, this isn't a big flaw. Mount Tiango doesn't lack such people. After all, the path of culinary arts is as vast as the sea. It's not easy to even grasp the essence left behind by the predecessors. He paused for a moment and said seriously, but this method won't work in front of Guashuk. He's already too old. Huaisher Kun is too experienced. He's so experienced that he won't be swayed even if his opponent brings out a dish that has already existed, because he's already prepared countermeasures against all methods. If your friend wants to duel with Guashuk, then she can't hope to defeat him with some secret technique from 100 years ago, because he's existed even longer than the secret technique. Even something older than him can't defeat him. His existence is the combination of the culinary demon techniques of Dongxia that have existed for more than 5,000 years. Dragon Mountain Workshop said, Miss Huai Shiki, you must think of another way. After a long silence, Huaisher let out a long breath. Understand. Thank you very much, Dragon Mountain Workshop. No need. It's too embarrassing. Dragon Mountain Workshop smiled helplessly. Other than some nonsense, I can't do anything to help. No, these words are enough. After saying goodbye, Huaisher hung up the phone. He casually took off his coat from the hanger and looked at the night sky outside the window. I've been here for so many days, and I haven't gone out at all. I'm going out to visit my neighbors. He turned around and said, you guys take care of the house and protect Junshi. Don't use the TV to play strange programs, understand? Holy. Behind him, A flock of iron crows nodded vigorously. They had a look that said, "Don't worry, I understand." God knows if they understood or not. Huaisher thought for a moment. Amidst the wailing of the crows, he directly cut the wires of the TV and pulled out the top-up card from the player. Just like that, Hawaii-san's figure disappeared into the night. For a long time, in the silence, the crows looked at each other. After confirming that Huaisher had really left, they excitedly flapped their wings. A selfless crow picked up both ends of the wires and restarted the TV. Then, from the sofa, under the bed, on top of the cabinet, in the crevices of the wall, and in the soil of the garden, the gifts from the Nara crows. The DVD player was turned on. Under the illumination of the light on the screen, the crows gathered in one place. They focused on learning, carefully observing, and reveling in the advanced knowledge of Ingzhou. Only the faint sound of holy could be heard faintly. Understand, I will give the Shimazu clan's invitation full consideration. Please don't worry. For the long-term cooperation between the two families, the alliance between Onfong and Satsuma will continue. The business strategy of the Guanyama Group will not change in the next 2 years. If the Asakura clan has such a plan, then the Riken clan will reconsider the next stage of investment in the country of Ekizan. The Riken clan will not compromise on the location of the Mercedes production base. Stimulating the economy and revitalizing the development is a matter of course. Please rest assured, Mr. Mayor, the Riken clan will always be the guardian of Onfong. This will not change. Next, I will arrange for people to discuss the issue of relief funds. Nonsense. Go back to your master and wag your tail. It is a foregone conclusion that Taiching Heavy Industries will fully enter the Ingzhou market. However, the officials of the Ministry of Economic Affairs do not have to be troubled. If you look at it from another perspective, this may not be a bad thing. The selection of the Hachikuchi warriors has been scheduled. Unfortunately, I have already made arrangements for Yoid's master. However, the loyal candidate has not been considered for the time being. Before that, I need to see more sincerity. When the 6-hour continuous meeting ended, when Hoopa came back to his senses, the sky was already bright. Expressing his position, listening, mediation, and judgment, expressing his position, hiding his bottom line, disguising his strategy, bribing his friends, and deterring his enemies, countless things were tangled up in an intricate manner, and this was just the beginning. Next, there were still representatives of the three families waiting, but compared to the previous matter, it was a trivial matter. After instructing his subordinates to arrange for tomorrow, Riken took a last look at Onfong, who was sitting in the quiet room, and suddenly wanted to go out for a walk. Staying here was really too boring. She pushed the door open. Order had been restored in the Riken clan. The people of Ingzhou did not seem to panic about the arrival of the disaster, and they did not feel strange after the disaster left. As if they were already accustomed to it, the servants from Onfong had once again filled the vacancies and continued to operate the huge manor. Everything was in order. Only the cracks on the walls that could not be repaired for the time being and the traces of collapse proved the existence of yesterday's turmoil. After sensing the existence of Hoopa, the servants who had been busy in the early morning quietly retreated to both sides of the road, weakened their sense of existence, and respectfully lowered their heads to avoid disturbing the mood of the future master. In the quiet, the spacious courtyard built by a famous architect was filled with zen. But for some reason, Hoopa somewhat missed the loud cleaning Annie at the Jinling Social Security Bureau. Although she couldn't be more familiar with her, every time she saw her, she would shout a few times. Occasionally, when she bought chives and pork from the cafeteria, she would quietly tell her that there were big buns today and to remember to get off work early. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to make it. But the buns were too greasy. Every time she stuffed them with so many, she couldn't finish them. Hoopa sighed and looked at the birds flying across the sky. Suddenly, she softly sighed. It's not good to be too quiet. She turned around and walked to her bedroom, intending to take a nap before noon, but her footsteps paused. She felt a faint aura slowly brewing not far away. Like surging underground fire, the rising lava arched the earth. Through the thick layers of earth, It emitted waves of heat that could not be ignored. When she walked around the corner and came to the lakeside, she saw the skinny figure. It was as if he had aged 10 years overnight. But the evil hidden in the body became more and more shocking. It was almost about to burst out. Chapter 687. In this cold morning courtyard, Upasab was shook once again. His back was facing Hupa, and he still had the appearance of a middle-aged man. He was humming something in a low voice, as if there was no one around. After taking off his shirt, his upper body was already naked. The strong muscles on his back were exposed under the morning light. That was the vitality brought about by his abundant life. However, under that seemingly healthy skin color, there was indeed a grayish-black color surging. His abnormal muscles and lungs pulsed under that shell, emitting an inhuman aura. Just like this, Gwashuk rolled up his trousers and walked forward step by step. He stepped into the waist-deep water until the cold lake water submerged his abdomen. He raised his hands and scooped up the cold water droplets, sprinkling them on his face and body. He carefully washed his body. Finally, he put his hands together and closed his eyes. His back was clearly facing him, but Hupa could feel that that person was smiling. He was smiling with incomparable satisfaction and gratitude. Hupa quietly stood in the distance for a long time. When Gwashuk opened his eyes again, he asked curiously, "What are you doing?" Gwashuk lowered his head and looked at the rippling lake water. After a long time, he calmly replied, "Worshipping the gods." Worshipping the gods. A demon-like old man was worshipping the gods in such a solemn and serious manner. There is nothing more abrupt and comical in this world than this. Hupa sneered. You actually expect the gods in this world to show mercy to you. Hupa, what the people of Donsha revere is not the tangible things, because they will decay if they have a form. They cannot exist forever. Gwashuk swept up the lake water and washed his arms and long hair that had turned white. His expression was so calm that it didn't seem like him at all. He softly said, "The only thing that has truly continued since ancient times is the unfathomable will of heaven. I sincerely express my joy and gratitude towards it." He said, "Because it responded to me." When he said this, Gwashuk revealed a smile, as if he had received happiness. Incomparable peace. Since the year he was 14, he had woken up before 5 o'clock every morning, bathed and changed his clothes, and sincerely prayed. He also sincerely expressed his gratitude towards that mysterious fate. This kind of sincere worship had never been interrupted for a single day. Today, he was still studying the culinary arts. Today, he was still making progress. This was great. Even though it had been rough and difficult, Gwashuk had never regretted it for even a second in his long life. Even if he was betrayed by his friends and family, even if he couldn't recover from his illness, even if he could feel the piercing pain in his soul with every breath, such a life was simply too blissful. It had been a long time since Gwashuk felt a surge of emotions. Ever since he was 160 years old, he had never been so impatient. He wanted to trample on his opponent, completely defeating her, seizing victory, casting a shadow over her, bestowing mockery and scars upon her, obtaining her defeated and hateful gaze. Would she be in pain? Would she feel indignant? Could she still maintain her confidence? Could he still have such a firm gaze that made others jealous? Would he still be able to smile as flawlessly as a Holy Spirit? Just thinking about this made Gwashuk uncontrollably excited. As he prayed, his expression became more and more solemn. He was like a Holy Spirit. Hupa looked at his pious appearance and felt a wave of absurdity. Gwashuk, you actually know how to pray for your own victory? No, I'm praying for the sun to rise quickly. Gwashuk smiled blissfully and raised his hand, pointing to the sky. Look, Hupa, he said, my God has responded to me. Accompanying his words, a huge sun slowly rose from the vault of heaven. That ball of intense light violently circled and jumped out of the gravitational pull of the horizon. It gradually rose, bit by bit, occupying the main axis of heaven and earth. However, it was still so slow that it made one feel disgusted and unable to wait any longer. Hurry up, son. Please shine on me. Sprinkle down your compassionate sunlight. Shine on me. Shine on my old and broken body, and witness the few beautiful moments left. You are so short, and you leave so quickly, so why be in such a hurry when you arrive? In the lake, the praying man squinted his eyes and bathed in the sunlight falling from the sky. He laughed loudly. They began to sing happily, as if he had heard the truth. A withered lotus flower quietly bloomed in the lake. Its pure white petals swayed, and a rich and greedy fragrance spread out, lingering in the world of mortals. When the dark door opened in front of him again, Huaishir felt that he was walking step by step into hell. What hit him in the face was not the cold wind, and what he saw was the same as before. As he walked forward step by step, he felt the same calm mood as usual. However, it was difficult to suppress the uneasy omen, and he could not imagine what kind of enemy was waiting for him in the arena. Even the scorching sun at noon was gradually losing its temperature. The further down he went, the more he could feel this kind of abnormality that went deep into his bones. When the final door opened, the frozen air and scene were revealed in front of him. No one in the silent stand spoke, even though it was almost full. Everyone was either gloomy or uneasy, and only a faint humming came from the arena. "It's so slow, Miss Huaishir." Guashuk shrugged and spread out his hands. "I've waited for so long that the flowers have withered." Stunned, Huaishir did not know how to continue such an old joke and only wanted to sigh. Old people shouldn't force themselves to keep up with the trend, okay? Let's surf the internet together next time. On the stage, Guashuk smiled, calm and composed, without any ferocious aura. He had a kind face and was so peaceful. Like a senior monk who had seen through the world, he had no desires. Only the darkness in his eyes was getting thicker, as if he could see through all disguises. He looked at Huaishir. Finally, he looked at the huge material box in his hand. It was almost flat, but it was still so huge. If it was erected, it would probably be as tall as a person. "Looks like you've brought a lot of things. Do you need me to help carry them?" "No need, my old arms and legs are old. It's not good to hurt them." Huaishir stepped up the steps, step by step, and walked toward Guashuk, putting down the box in his hand. When he turned back to look at the audience, he saw Hupo's calm eyes and the complicated expressions of disgust, displeasure, and anticipation. Guashuk nodded in satisfaction. "Look, everyone is looking forward to it. Don't let them wait too long." "No, I think they're just looking forward to your defeat." Miss Huaiji smiled, raised her head, and looked up at the high platform. "Is there no one there today? I don't like people standing too high up and commenting, so I let them sit a little lower." The two emissaries are good at listening to others' opinions, and they readily accept them. Guashuk turned back and looked at the two officials below the stage. One had an ashen face, while the other had an ashen face. But no one objected. "You can start now," Guashuk thoughtfully reminded them. The one with an ashen face trembled, opened his mouth, and began to recite the rules that no one cared about. The one with an ashen face rang the bell beside him. His attitude was as tame as a dog, and Huaishir couldn't help but wonder, this old man is so domineering. Did he make meat pies for them for breakfast? But no matter what, under the crisp sound of the bell, under the witness of the High Emperor's emissary, the final showdown between the chefs and demons began without any fanfare. "Who's going first?" Huaishir asked. He reached out and took out a few Zhou coins from his pocket, tossed them, and suggested, "Do you want to guess with coins?" "Sure." Guashuk nodded, his smile still warm, and he didn't have any objections. "I want flowers," he said. "Then I want words." Huaishir thought for a moment, raised his hand, and casually tossed the coin in his hand. In the almost frozen time, only the coins slowly rose, passing through their line of sight, and climbed to the top. It hovered for a moment, reflecting a faint metallic light in the air, and then fell down. It was still so fretful. In that slow flip, it fell down, until a crisp sound burst forth, and in the rapid rotation and buzzing, the vibrating coin on the table returned to its original calm. In the pin-drop silence, everyone raised their heads and looked at the results on the table. Only Huaishur stared into Guashuk's eyes, puzzled. From the beginning to the end, this old man didn't seem to have any intention of making a move. It was as if he was letting it go and didn't make any moves. When the results appeared, he was beaming with joy, revealing a joy from the bottom of his heart. Even if the final winner was Huaishur. On the top side of the coin, there were words. Huaishur lowered his head and looked at the results that appeared on the coin. Even if he had the upper hand, he couldn't feel relaxed at all. That's great, Miss Huaishur. I'm happy for you. You won't be defeated before the round has even begun. Guashuk clapped and laughed happily. Sure enough, luck is on my side. That kind of complacent expression really made people burn with anger. There's no need to ruin the opponent's battle experience from the beginning, Senior Gua. Huaishur raised his eyes and looked over. You should know that if you want to compare lines, I have more confidence in my cooking skills. Indeed, Miss Huaishur is really a strong opponent. Guashuk sighed sincerely. However, what I said just now was from the bottom of my heart. I really want to see Miss Huaishur's active shadow on the stage as an opponent. Just like the legendary Valkyrie from the Golden Palace with a resolute and gorgeous posture, it's really admirable. Although he said so, unfortunately, Huaishur didn't believe a single word. He had already experienced how despicable and vulgar Guashuk was when he entered the competition state. How could he fall in his trap? Even if this old man took out a photoshopped nude photo of his face in the next moment, Huaishur's heart wouldn't have any fluctuations or surprise. Things like moral integrity weren't something that everyone had. However, the work still had to continue. Huaishur unscrewed the bottle of mineral water and poured buckets of huge purified water into the pot. He turned on the fire and rummaged through the material box. He found a small bag tightly wrapped in several layers of filter bags and casually threw it into the pot and closed the lid. This is stewing soup? Guashuk raised his eyebrows and laughed strangely. Is the battle of attrition starting? It doesn't matter. 3 hours, 5 hours, even if it's a day and a night, I'll wait for you. Miss Huaishur, this old man's heart is burning with passion for you. Don't think too much. It's just a pre-treatment for the ingredients that will be used next. Huaishur glanced at him. The next ingredients will be used in this round. The material box was finally opened. Under everyone's watchful eyes, he reached out and reached into the attached water tank. What was taken out was a lively Wong one-tail tiger pufferfish. Someone was stunned and lost his voice. He repeatedly looked at the tiger-like stripes on the pufferfish and the familiar aura. He turned around in disbelief and looked at the gloomy Hell's cooking demon sitting at the back. Huaishur Suko's opponent in the first round of the cooking demon duel was the chef general of the century-old restaurant 3 roads from the border, Netherworld, Ryasaka, Shunjin Kei. At the same time, he was the only man in the world who could take out a tiger pufferfish. Why are you looking at me? Shunjin Kei raised his pale face and asked indifferently. I've been unhappy with that old man for a long time. Can't I? These words were indeed reasonable. If there weren't purple bruises on his eyes, it would be more realistic. Chapter 688. Things happened very suddenly. To put it simply, last night, Shun Jinxing was awakened by the sound of knocking on the door. After opening the door, he found a beautiful woman smiling gently at him under the moonlight. Then he closed the door. For Shun Jinxing, that kind of smile was no different from the ferocity of an evil spirit. He was so scared that his legs were trembling. He hid in the kitchen and trembled with a kitchen knife. He didn't know what this crazy woman was doing here. Then the door was torn down. Miss Huaiji walked in and talked to him in a friendly manner. She asked him to give her the Dragon River pufferfish. It would be best if he could give her the recipe. In this regard, Shun Jinxing could only say, you are king dreaming. Then something happened that no one wanted to see. Mr. Shin Jinxing said afterwards that he regretted it very much, but what finally convinced him was not the physical violence or the shadow in his heart, but the words before saying goodbye. Don't you want to see the old man's failure? Huaishur looked down at him and said, I want to defeat him. I will stand on the arena tomorrow, but I know that I won't be able to win. I need you to lend me some of your power." His hatred for Guashuk overwhelmed his resistance to Huaishur. After hesitating for a moment, he sighed and took out the ingredients he had been taking care of carefully from the preservation cabinet. The Dragon River pufferfish, the Dragon King, that was specially made for the finals, together with the cooking methods and skills of the Iron Cannon banquet. He was not worried even if he told all of it. The most important thing in his Dragon River pufferfish was not these, but the unique taste that perfectly swam between delicious and highly toxic. This was the secret of the three-way chefs, and it was something that Huaishur could never learn. Including this point, he told her frankly. Huaishur was not worried about this. He had other ways to make up for it. But before he left, he was stopped by Shun Jinqing. "What's wrong?" Huaishur looked back and asked curiously, "Is there anything else? As for the cost of the ingredients, please don't worry. I will pay in full." "No, I just want to tell you one thing. Although I don't want to admit it, I have to say that even the Dragon King can't defeat that old man. His power is above yours and mine." Shun Jinqing said unhappily, "If you want to defeat him, relying on my strength alone is not enough." "I'll work hard," Huaishur said. In the final moment of silence, Shun Jinqing subconsciously glanced his right and told Huaishur, "If you still don't want to give up, I can only tell you that Zhu Zijian lives next door." He closed the broken door and returned to his room. After a while, he heard the noise that he had experienced before from next door. He couldn't help but turn over in his dream and sleep even more soundly. There were two things that made people the happiest in this world. The first was when the person he disliked was unlucky. The second thing was that someone had to suffer with him. To think that they would meet on the same night. It was truly a blessing in life. Therefore, on the arena, Johnny Ku Zijian, whose arm was still in a cast, had an extremely resentful expression on his face. On Shun Jinqing's left, Enrico Saligate, who was sitting calmly, was smoking a cigarette without any pressure. He was chatting and laughing with Vladimir, who was in a wheelchair. Anyway, he was no longer the cooking demon. He no longer valued his skills. He even enthusiastically introduced the cooking demon next door to Huaishur. It was a rare opportunity. Everyone was together. How happy! Just like that, at the back of the arena, everyone happily gathered together to form a whole row. Other than the fact that most of them had experience of being beaten up and blackmailed by Huaishur, without exception, they were disgusted and unhappy with Guashuk, and even maliciously. It's understandable. Who doesn't want to see the bad old man suffer? Don't you think so? Miss Huaiji waved enthusiastically at the supporters and turned to look at him. "Friendship, hard work, and victory. I already have two of them. Guashuk, are you afraid?" "Afraid. So afraid that I'm going to die." Ha 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 ha. Guashuk was amused by this unity of will. He casually waved his hand. "No matter how many chickens and pottery dogs there are, they won't be able to do anything. Miss Huaiji, you can start." Huaishur had already made the first cut. In the crisp sound of the chopping board and the blade colliding, the dragon pufferfish, known as the Dragon King, suddenly twitched and let out a high-pitched and sharp cry. Its whole body swelled, and countless bone spikes with a metallic color pierced out. But this couldn't stop Huaishur from continuing to cut. Guashuk's smile gradually faded. He focused on Huaiji's knife skills, and his eyes gradually became serious. He wasn't amazed by the sharpness of the blade, but was surprised by the depth of Huaishur's skills. It was just like the legendary story of entering into a world without thickness. In the cadence of the rhythm, the blade spilled out a silent melody. There was a flickering and gorgeous blade light jumping between the Dragon King's muscles. In Yingzhou, there had always been a tradition of generals cooking for guests in front of them. Across the bar, the guests could clearly see how their dishes were completed in the hands of the generals, step by step, becoming a wonderful essence between the tongues of the generals. It wasn't just the intimacy of being close to the food, but also the beauty of the cooking skills. Even though the performance of this kind of skill had some elements of showing off, but one had to admit, at this moment, In the hands of Huaiji Suko, the knife skills that could only be used to kill and frighten people had become unbelievably beautiful. It was completely dazzling. Even Guashuk didn't manage to see how she had handled the situation clearly. More importantly, in just one night, how could she so skillfully and quickly disintegrate the dragon pufferfish? He could conclude that even Shun Jinji couldn't reach this level. Just by looking at the disbelieving faces at the back of the auditorium, he knew. The blade cut across, and the fish meat bloomed like flowers. It was piled up into the shape of a peony on a beautifully decorated plate and presented. The fish meat, which was transparent like thin paper, shone with a sparkling luster, as if it had a crystal-like shell. With the change of light, there was a burst of colorful illusions. It was almost as pure as crystal. The sweet smell rushed to his face, with a poison-like charm and erosion, making it impossible for people to look away. Is it starting now? It's just the appetizer. The rest will continue. Huaishir shrugged. Isn't this because I'm afraid that you'll be bored waiting? Guashuk took out a chopstick holder from his pocket and pulled out a pair of ivory chopsticks, causing Vladimir, who was cheering below, to reprimand him. The man lowered his head and looked at the delicacies on the plate. His gaze became profound. This is really interesting. He reached out, picked up a thin piece, and put it in front of his eyes. Through the almost transparent fish meat, he could see the dragon pufferfish swimming freely in the fish tank. It was still alive. Even if it had been cut open and its internal organs were removed, it was still swimming freely in the water, as if nothing had happened. It had long been intoxicated in a short dream. I have to say, it's really an unprecedented experience. It's exciting. Guashuk opened his mouth and put the delicious fish meat without the slightest tetrodotoxin into his mouth. He chewed and enjoyed the fresh sweetness and sweetness spreading in his mouth at this moment. He nodded in intoxication. The taste bomb exploded at this moment. Miss Huaishir, in terms of sashimi, you've already surpassed Shun Jinqing. He was not stingy with his praise. Even if the beard and hair on his face were growing wildly, his feet standing on the ground did not move at all. Even if countless tree-like aerial roots were growing rapidly in his trousers, taking root on the ground, drilling through the iron and stone, piercing into the soil, and spreading rapidly. The wooden texture spread wildly from his face, and a terrifying rigidity spread throughout his body. His entire body was rapidly turning into wood. Among the tens of thousands of vitality from Mount Udai, the vitality made from thousands of abyssal plants carefully selected by Huaishir was growing vigorously in the terrifying depths of his body. Spreading. The false vitality was like a bomb that set off wild waves, injecting surging vitality. At the same time, it also accelerated his aging and decline. As long as he was alive, death could not be avoided. And now, the vitality that Huaishir carefully prepared in his body was infinitely accelerating this process. After all, this was the limit of this old body, until a raging fire ignited in his eyes. Guashuk smiled. Countless cracks suddenly appeared on his wooden body. From the depths of his body, there was a colorless fire that flowed out and spread. It burned away all the impure vitality in his body. It returned to its original state, and the plate in front of him had long been swept clean. He still felt that it was not enough. He looked up and asked, "Is there wine?" Wait a moment. Along with the golden tempera was a cup of warm sake. When the alchemy fire flashed, the burnt fin fell into the cup. Amidst the pungent smell, the unique fragrance of fresh wine rose. The colorless sake had already turned dark green. All the vicious poisons that Huaishir had prepared last night were gathered into this cup of poisonous wine that was almost like a plague and placed in front of Guashuk. The old man raised his head and drank it in one gulp. Then, in that instant, the poison sprouted. He froze on the spot. His 5 fingers suddenly twitched, and he actually crushed the empty wine cup in his hand. Then, a ray of terrifying lightning flowed out of his mouth. The resentment and anger in the lightning spread, causing the air in the entire arena to instantly heat up. Tyrannical and wild, it was about to spread in all directions. Guashuk took a deep breath. Clenching his teeth, he swallowed the bolt of lightning that had escaped back into his stomach. Then, his swollen abdomen quickly shriveled, and there was a low humming sound. It was as if his stomach was twitching, glowing with hunger and thirst. Good wine. Gwashuk praised and laughed heartily. It's really appetizing. I was careless and actually digested the last bit of stock in my stomach. Countless mold spots, strains, and toxins appeared on his eyes and quickly faded. Endless toxins circulated in his body, but they could not do anything to it. Instead, it was like a digestive pill that helped him digest. It made his aura become more and more ferocious. He swept away the tempura, sushi, and everything else. Finally, he looked hungrily at Huai Shi and the steaming casserole in his hand. Gwashuk grinned, revealing his white and neat sharp teeth. He could not wait. "Can you hurry up, Miss Huai Shi?" he urged in a hoarse voice. "Beauty is not something to be eaten. This dish, the most important part, can you hurry up and serve it?" "Don't worry, the rice has just been heated." Huai Shi calmly appeased the diner in front of him. He stretched out his hand and pressed down the casserole. The casting began. In the blink of an eye, thick steam gushed out from the gaps and cavities, carrying an indescribably tempting aroma. Even Shun Jinxing, who was below the stage, could not help but clench his hands tightly and grab his knees with his eyes wide open. Was it anger, shock, or jealousy? This rich fragrance was actually above his own. When the lid of the casserole was lifted, a dazzling golden light gushed out, illuminating everyone's eyes. The delicate fish rolled in the cauldron. The fresh and delicious smell, unique to the pufferfish, was like a torrent, swallowing everything. Gwashuk slowly raised his eyebrows, as if he was amazed. However, Huai Shi could not hide his dissatisfaction and regret. In the end, it was still a little lacking. "What are you waiting for?" Gwashuk clenched his chopsticks and urged hungrily. Hurry up, Miss Huai Shi, I can't wait." "Wait a moment, there is still the last step." Huai Shi raised his hand, opened the jar beside him, and poured the fishbone soup that had been simmering for a long time onto the pufferfish casserole. In an instant, the thick and sweet aroma shrank inward and disappeared without a trace. All the wonderful taste had been condensed in the casserole, and now, floating above the pufferfish casserole was actually pickled cabbage. That's right, all the cooking demons could clearly distinguish the ingredients. Pickled cabbage made using the Eastern Summer's craftsmanship. However, what made everyone angry was that this was simply a crude product that was casually made. It was as if a burly man had openly barged into a well-dressed cold dinner party. Below the stage, Shun Jinxing roared angrily. "What are you doing, Miss Huai Shi? You'll only ruin this dish." "Shut up." The one who retorted was unexpectedly Gwashuk. The moment the old man woke up from his daze, he raised his head and angrily rebuked. "Ignorant brat, letting you watch this duel is already a great honor. Don't reach for a yard after taking an inch. Don't make a fool of yourself." Shun Jinxing froze in place. Gwashuk's expression was solemn. He lowered his head, solemnly looking at the pickled cabbage pufferfish casserole in front of him. Such a strong and ferocious love, it is truly shocking. This is not the cooking method of the three roads. He sighed softly. "Miss Huai Shi, who is the real person who created it? You just need to know that it is a beautiful young lady who is unknown to the public." Huai Shi whistled and lowered his head to look at the dish he had made. He looked at it with satisfaction. During this long night, in addition to repeatedly practicing and mastering all the memories from all the cooking demons recorded in the Book of Destiny, he especially focused on practicing the orchard's secret recipe of love that he had scammed from Luo Xian at the last minute. Although she was very dissatisfied with Huai Shi for cooking for others, she still gave him 120% support. Over the phone, Luo Xian taught him step by step. Finally, he succeeded in learning and mastering the dish. It was a delicacy made by his daughter with love and care for her elderly father. Try it. It is specially made to nourish the old man's body. Huai Shi reached out and pushed the casserole over. He couldn't wait to admire his next appearance. In silence, Gwashuk carefully raised his hand, picked up a piece of fish wrapped in sticky soup and pieces of pickled cabbage, and put it into his mouth. It was as if he had swallowed a treasure. He felt the unstoppable love of the abyss overflowing from his mouth. The chewing sound was so ear-piercing. It was as if blades were colliding with each other. In the dead silence, everyone looked up in shock and stared at Gwashuk's opened and closed lips. They saw blood slowly flowing from his mouth, and even the teeth that had fallen out. It was as if there was an invisible and sharp knife in his mouth. The unreserved love turned into a terrifying power that could kill the soul, wreaking havoc in his body. Every time he swallowed, there was dripping blood and even a tooth that had fallen out. This was the price of accepting this love. It was hard to imagine how abnormal and crazy it was to be able to place such heavy feelings in the recipe. Such strong love. It is no longer domestic violence. It is murder, Miss Huaisher. In the ravaging, the old cooking demon moaned happily. Sharp teeth grew out of his exposed gums again. But it is really refreshing. How many years has it been since I enjoyed such warm care from a junior? Again, he said. Again. He picked up the empty bowl and could not wait to reach out with his chopsticks, but he was stopped by Huaisher. When the old man frowned angrily, he saw Huaisher's concerned expression. Eating only vegetables is bad for the stomach. Do you want rice? A bowl of steaming white rice was placed in front of the old man. The plain rice grains reflected a sparkling light. Amid the steam, it was mouth-watering. Gwashuk took the bowl, picked it up, and ate a mouthful. The moment his teeth closed, he could not help but widen his eyes. This is in his mouth. He did not even need to chew. Even if he pressed his tongue gently, the solid rice grains melted by themselves, turning into a fragrant porridge that flowed in his mouth. Traces of indescribable sweetness and comfort rose in his heart. He could not help but smile from the bottom of his heart. He became tranquil and peaceful. He could not help but wander and indulge in this warm and rich simple taste. He was able to make ordinary rice into such an outstanding dish. What kind of rice is this? White rice. No, it should be said, it's my special soft rice, right? Huaisher said with a smile, my stomach is not very good. The doctor advised me to steam the rice until it's soft before eating. How is it? Is it delicious? Delicious. Very delicious. Gwashuk's chopsticks pulled the rice and took a big bite. He closed his eyes in enjoyment. The taste is excellent. It's intoxicating and enviable. I really want to eat such rice every day. In this way, a big mouthful of fish and a big mouthful of rice. Gwashuk began to eat heartily. She enjoyed the suffocating and despairing love, as well as the plain and simple rice. The two feelings intertwined, giving her a strange feeling that she had never experienced before. But soon, a strong sense of loss rose from his heart, because when that love and that simplicity blended together, it formed a dreamlike feeling that was too intoxicating. However, this wonderful feeling disappeared too quickly. It was like a hurried glance through the window. He wanted to see it again. He wanted to appreciate it again. He wanted to possess it forever. He wanted to get it. Gwashuk's movements suddenly paused for a moment. He was stiff on the spot. Unconsciously, his expression had become distorted. He found that he actually began to feel jealous. Jealous. At this moment, Gwashuk felt jealousy from the bottom of his heart towards the plain girl in front of him. When this envy and jealousy emerged, whether it was the fish or rice in his mouth, it could not bring him any enjoyment. Instead, it made him even more angry. He didn't want to eat anymore. Enough, enough. Why is there still so much? He looked up at the dishes in the pot that did not seem to reduce at all, but he felt that he was too full. He could not eat anymore. There was no taste, but he could not stop. Why was he so humble? Was this food for the dogs? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.